Every civilization begins with survival. But philosophy begins when survival is no longer enough. When humans start asking what the world is, and what their place in it might be. From the earliest periods of human history, people lived in close contact with nature. They depended on the land, the weather, and the rhythms of the natural world. Over time, they noticed regular patterns, the rising and setting of the sun, the cycle of the seasons, and the repetition of life and death. These observations naturally raised questions about order and cause. At first, such questions were answered through myth. Natural forces were explained as the actions of gods or spirits, and stories were passed down to give meaning to human experience. Myth offered structure and reassurance, but it did not encourage critical examination. It accepted tradition rather than questioning it. Gradually, a different approach emerged. Some individuals began to seek explanations that relied on reason instead of narrative. Rather than asking which god caused an event, they asked what principles governed it. This shift marked the beginning of philosophical thinking. In ancient Greece, this change became especially visible. Thinkers such as Thales of Miletus attempted to explain nature in simple, rational terms. Thales proposed that all things originated from a single underlying substance. Others disagreed and offered alternative views, debating whether reality was constant or always changing, whether the world was made of many elements or one fundamental source. These early philosophers were not united by conclusions, but by method. They believed the universe could be understood through observation, reasoning, and debate. Knowledge was no longer something received passively from tradition. It became something to be examined and questioned. At the same time, philosophical inquiry was developing in other parts of the world. Thales of Miletus is widely considered the first philosopher in Western history. He lived in the 6th century BCE in the city of Miletus, located on the western coast of Asia Minor. At that time, most people explained natural events through mythology. Thunder, earthquakes, and floods were attributed to the actions of gods. Thales, however, asked a different question. He wondered what the world was truly made of. Instead of relying on myths, he looked for a fundamental principle behind everything in nature. Thales proposed that water is the basic substance from which all things come and to which all things return. This idea, while simple, represented a new way of thinking. Water is essential for life, found in rivers, seas, rainfall, and within living beings themselves. It can change forms, becoming ice or vapor, yet it remains fundamentally water. Thales observed these properties and concluded that water might be the underlying principle of the universe. The concept of a single, fundamental substance is called arche. For Thales, identifying the arche was more important than the exact substance he chose. His method of observation and reasoning set the stage for philosophy and science. Thales also suggested that nature is full of life. He claimed that everything is full of gods, meaning that natural forces are active and that objects have the ability to act or change. He noticed that magnets attract iron and that amber produces static electricity when rubbed. From such observations, he inferred that matter itself contains inherent powers. This early recognition of natural forces marked a major step toward understanding the universe as governed by laws, rather than divine whim. In addition to philosophy, Thales contributed to mathematics and astronomy. He introduced geometric principles to Greece from Egypt and is credited with theorems, such as understanding that a circle is bisected by its diameter. Pythagoras of Samos was one of the most influential and mysterious figures in ancient philosophy. He lived in the 6th century BCE and is remembered not only as a philosopher, but also as a mathematician, religious thinker, and founder of a philosophical community. Unlike earlier thinkers such as Thales, Pythagoras did not focus primarily on identifying a physical substance as the foundation of reality. Instead, he proposed something far more abstract. He believed that the fundamental principle of the universe was number. For Pythagoras, reality was not made meaningful by matter alone, but by structure, order, and proportion. He observed that numerical relationships governed many aspects of the natural world. Musical harmony, for example, could be explained through simple numerical ratios. The length of a string determined the pitch it produced, and harmonious sounds emerged when these lengths followed precise mathematical proportions. From this, Pythagoras concluded that number is the hidden framework behind both nature and beauty. This belief marked a major shift in philosophical thinking. Where earlier philosophers searched for a material origin of the universe, Pythagoras introduced an abstract principle. Numbers, for him, were not merely tools for counting. They were real, powerful, and fundamental. He believed that the cosmos itself was structured mathematically, an idea later summarized as the harmony of the spheres. According to this view, the movements of celestial bodies followed mathematical ratios, producing a cosmic harmony that governed the universe. Pythagoras also founded a community that combined philosophy, mathematics, and a strict way of life. His followers lived communally and followed rules concerning diet, behavior, and study. They believed in the purification of the soul and practiced discipline as a path toward wisdom. Central to their beliefs was the idea of the transmigration of souls. The notion that the soul is immortal and is reborn in different bodies. This belief connected Pythagorean philosophy to religious and ethical concerns, making it more than a purely intellectual system. One of the most famous ideas associated with Pythagoras is the theorem that bears his name. The Pythagorean theorem describes the relationship between the sides of a right-angled triangle. While the theorem may have been known earlier in other cultures, Pythagoras and his followers were among the first to treat it as a universal and demonstrable truth. This emphasis on proof and logical structure became central to later mathematical thought. For Pythagoras, mathematics was not separate from life. It was a path to understanding reality and achieving harmony within the soul. He believed that order in the universe should be reflected in human behavior. A life guided by balance, moderation, and reason was, in his view, a life aligned with the structure of the cosmos. Although much of Pythagoras' life is surrounded by legend, his influence is undeniable. His ideas shaped later philosophers such as Plato, who adopted the belief that abstract forms and mathematical structures are more real than the physical world. Through this legacy, Pythagoras helped establish the idea that reality can be understood through reason, order, and number. With Pythagoras, philosophy moves from the study of nature as matter to the study of reality as structure. His thought represents a turning point where abstraction, mathematics, and metaphysics become central to understanding the universe. Heraclitus of Ephesus was one of the most profound and challenging thinkers of early Greek philosophy. He lived around the late 6th and early 5th century BCE, in the city of Ephesus, located in Asia Minor. Unlike philosophers who sought stability and permanence in the universe, Heraclitus focused on change. He believed that reality is not static, but constantly in motion. For him, change was not a secondary feature of the world. It was the very essence of existence. Heraclitus is most famous for the idea that everything flows. He expressed this through the statement that one cannot step into the same river twice. The river appears to be the same, but its waters are always moving, always different. In the same way, all things in the universe are continuously changing. Nothing remains fixed. This view challenged the common belief that reality consists of stable substances with permanent identities. Despite emphasizing change, Heraclitus did not believe the world was chaotic or random. He argued that change follows an underlying order, which he called the logos. The logos represents a rational principle that governs the universe. Although most people live as if this order does not exist, Heraclitus believed that those who reflect deeply can recognize it. The logos is not imposed from outside the world, but is inherent within it, shaping how opposites interact and how change occurs. A central idea in Heraclitus' philosophy is the unity of opposites. He observed that opposing forces are not enemies, but partners in the structure of reality. Day and night, life and death, war and peace, all depend on each other. One cannot exist without the other. According to Heraclitus, harmony arises from tension, just as the sound of a lyre depends on the stretching of its strings. Conflict, rather than destroying order, is what maintains it. Heraclitus also identified fire as the primary element of the universe. Democritus of Abdera was one of the most original thinkers of ancient Greece. He lived during the 5th and 4th centuries BCE, and his work represents a turning point in the attempt to understand the universe through reason rather than myth. Unlike Parmenides, who denied change and argued that reality is a single, unchanging being, Democritus sought to explain both stability and change in the world. He did so through the idea of atoms. According to Democritus, all matter is composed of tiny, indivisible, and eternal particles called atoms. These atoms differ in shape, size, and arrangement, and their combinations produce the diverse forms of the world we perceive. Atoms themselves do not change, and the void, or empty space, allows them to move and combine in countless ways. By proposing atoms, Democritus offered a way to account for both permanence and transformation. Change occurs not because things emerge from nothing, but because atoms rearrange into new patterns. This theory provided a naturalistic explanation for phenomena that had previously been attributed to gods or chance. Fire, water, earth, and air are made of atoms arranged in particular ways. Life itself arises from specific atomic arrangements. Even perception, thought, and sensation result from the interactions of atoms within the body and the soul. For Democritus, everything, from the smallest grain of sand to the largest star, obeys the principles of matter in motion. Democritus was also deeply concerned with human life and ethics. He argued that understanding the nature of reality leads to tranquility. By recognizing that pleasure and pain, life and death, are the results of atomic arrangements, people can free themselves from fear, superstition, and excessive desire. Knowledge, in this sense, is not merely theoretical, it has practical value, allowing humans to live in harmony with the world. Parmenides of Elea stands as one of the most radical thinkers in early Greek philosophy. He lived in the early 5th century BCE in the city of Elea, in southern Italy. While earlier philosophers such as Heraclitus emphasized change and motion, Parmenides took a dramatically different path. He argued that change is not fundamental to reality at all. Instead, he claimed that true reality is unchanging, eternal, and indivisible. Parmenides presented his philosophy in the form of a poem, in which he describes a journey guided by reason. In this work, he distinguishes between two paths of understanding. One is the way of truth, which follows logic and reason. The other is the way of opinion, which relies on the senses and everyday experience. According to Parmenides, most people live according to opinion, believing that things come into existence, change, and pass away. But reason, he argued, reveals that this view is mistaken. At the center of Parmenides' thought is the idea of being. He asserted that being is, and non-being is not. From this simple statement, he drew far-reaching conclusions. If non-being does not exist, then nothing can come from it. Therefore, nothing can truly be born or destroyed. Change, which seems to involve something becoming what it previously was not, is logically impossible. For Parmenides, reality cannot arise from nothing, nor can it vanish into nothing. From this reasoning, Parmenides concluded that reality is one, continuous, and unchanging. It has no beginning and no end. It does not move, because movement would require empty space, and empty space would imply non-being. It does not change in quality, because change would mean becoming something it was not before. All apparent change, diversity, and motion belong only to the world of sensory perception, not to true reality itself. This philosophy placed reason above the senses in a way that was unprecedented. Parmenides argued that the senses deceive us. Confucius, known in China as Confucius, lived during the 6th and 5th centuries BCE, a time of great social and political upheaval. The Zhou dynasty was in decline, and the land was marked by chaos, war, and moral disorder. Amid this uncertainty, Confucius sought to restore harmony and stability through a philosophy grounded in ethics, education, and human relationships. He believed that the cultivation of virtue, both in individuals and rulers, was the key to a well-ordered society. At the center of Confucius thought is the concept of ren, often translated as humaneness or benevolence. Ren represents the quality of compassion, empathy, and moral integrity that individuals should develop in their interactions with others. Confucius argued that a society cannot flourish if people lack ren. By acting with respect, kindness, and consideration, individuals contribute to social harmony and establish trust within their communities. Ethics, in this sense, is not an abstract theory but a practical guide for living. Confucius also emphasized the importance of li, or ritual and proper conduct. Li encompasses ceremonies, social norms, and the everyday practices that structure relationships between people. These rituals, whether formal or informal, reinforce moral behavior and cultivate self-discipline. For Confucius, li was not mere ceremony, it was a way to connect individuals to the larger moral order and to cultivate virtue in daily life. Through li, people learn respect, responsibility, and the patterns of proper social interaction. Education held a central place in Confucius' philosophy. He believed that moral and intellectual cultivation should be available to all who are willing to learn, regardless of social class. Teaching was not simply the transfer of knowledge but a process of shaping character. By studying history, poetry, and classical texts, individuals could understand human nature, learn from the examples of the past, and develop the judgment necessary for ethical conduct. Confucius was also concerned with governance. He argued that rulers should lead by moral example rather than by force or coercion. A virtuous ruler inspires respect and loyalty, creating a society where order and justice arise naturally. Conversely, corrupt or selfish leaders foster disorder and unrest. This principle, known as the idea of government by virtue, became a central theme in Chinese political thought for centuries. Although Confucius wrote nothing himself, his teachings were preserved by his disciples in texts such as the Analects. These writings capture his conversations, advice, and reflections, illustrating his practical approach to philosophy. Rather than offering abstract metaphysical theories, Confucius focused on everyday life, human behavior, and the cultivation of ethical character. Confucius' influence has been profound and enduring. His ideas shaped Chinese culture, education, and government for more than 2 millennia, and they continue to resonate worldwide. By emphasizing moral development, social responsibility, and the importance of learning, Confucius provides a vision of philosophy that is both practical and deeply human. His thought reminds us that the health of society depends on the virtue of individuals, and that ethical life is inseparable from the life of the community. Jainism is one of the oldest religious and philosophical traditions of India, tracing its roots to the teachings of Mahavira, who lived during the 6th century BCE. It emphasizes the pursuit of spiritual liberation through ethical conduct, self-discipline, and understanding the nature of reality. Central to Jainism is the belief that the universe is eternal, without beginning or end, and operates according to its own natural laws rather than being created or governed by a deity. The core principle of Jainism is ahimsa, or non-violence. This principle extends beyond human beings to all living creatures, including animals, plants, and even microorganisms. Jains practice extreme care in their actions, speech, and thoughts to avoid causing harm. This commitment to non-violence shapes daily life, guiding dietary practices, occupations, and interactions with the world. For Jains, ethical living is inseparable from spiritual progress. Another fundamental concept is aparigraha, which is non-attachment. Jains are taught to detach from material possessions, desires, and ego, recognizing that attachment binds the soul to the cycle of birth and death, or samsara. By cultivating simplicity and contentment, individuals can reduce suffering and move closer to spiritual liberation. This discipline encourages self-control and mindfulness in all aspects of life. Jain philosophy also emphasizes anekantavada, the principle of multiple perspectives. According to this idea, reality is complex and cannot be captured fully by a single viewpoint. Truth is multifaceted, and understanding requires considering different perspectives and avoiding rigid judgments. This principle fosters tolerance, humility, and intellectual openness, reflecting the profound ethical and philosophical sophistication of Jain thought. Mahavira, the 24th Tirthankara, formalized these teachings and established a monastic order to preserve and transmit them. He emphasized meditation, ethical discipline, and the cultivation of knowledge as essential for liberating the soul. Liberation, or moksha, is achieved when the soul is freed from karma and the cycle of birth and death. Jains believe that this is attainable through persistent effort, moral conduct, and deep understanding of reality. Jainism also integrates a rigorous view of the cosmos. The universe, according to Jain philosophy, is structured and governed by natural laws. Time, space, and matter are eternal, and every soul interacts with these elements according to its actions and intentions. Karma, in Jainism, is not merely moral judgment but a subtle form of matter that binds the soul and determines its future experiences. Throughout history, Jainism has contributed to Indian philosophy, culture, and ethics. Its emphasis on nonviolence influenced other religious traditions, including Buddhism and later Hindu thought. Jain art, literature, and architecture reflect a deep commitment to spiritual ideals and ethical living. At its core, Jainism presents a vision of life in which moral discipline, respect for all beings, and philosophical reflection guide the soul toward ultimate liberation. Laozi, often regarded as the founder of Taoism, lived during the 6th century BCE, around the same time as Confucius. His teachings offer a profound contrast to the structured ethical philosophy of Confucius, focusing instead on harmony with the natural order and the principle of the Tao. The Tao, often translated as the Way, is the fundamental force behind all existence. It is not a deity, nor a moral code imposed from above, but the natural pattern that governs the universe, flowing through all things. For Laozi, human beings live best when they align themselves with the Tao rather than struggle against it. He emphasized simplicity, humility, and non-action, or Wu Wei, which does not mean inactivity but acting in accordance with the natural course of events. By practicing Wu Wei, individuals avoid unnecessary conflict, allowing life to unfold with minimal resistance. Laozi taught that wisdom lies in understanding the rhythms of nature and adapting to them, rather than imposing rigid structures or seeking to control what cannot be controlled. Laozi also emphasized the importance of emptiness and softness as strengths rather than weaknesses. He observed that rivers and valleys, though soft and yielding, endure and shape the landscape, while rigidity and force often lead to destruction. Similarly, in human life, flexibility, patience, and humility enable individuals to navigate challenges and remain in harmony with the world around them. Strength, according to Laozi, is found not in dominance but in alignment with the Way. The Tao cannot be fully described or captured in words, Laozi warned. Language and concepts are limited, and attempts to define the Tao completely will always fall short. Instead, he encouraged observation, reflection, and a life of quiet cultivation. By living simply, appreciating the natural world, and reducing desires, people can move closer to understanding the Tao and experience balance and tranquility. Socrates, who lived in Athens during the 5th century BCE, is widely regarded as one of the founders of Western philosophy. Unlike the pre-Socratic thinkers, Socrates focused not on the physical composition of the universe, but on human life, ethics, and the pursuit of knowledge. He asked questions about virtue, justice, and the good life, challenging people to examine their beliefs and assumptions. Socrates did not write any books. Instead, his ideas are known through the accounts of his students, most famously Plato. He engaged people in dialogue, asking questions that revealed contradictions in their thinking. This method, later called the Socratic method, encourages critical reflection, self-examination, and the search for truth through discussion. Socrates believed that wisdom begins with recognizing one's own ignorance. Central to Socrates' thought is the idea that the unexamined life is not worth living. He argued that moral understanding is more important than wealth, power, or reputation. Virtue, for Socrates, is knowledge. To know the good is to do the good. Ignorance, rather than malevolence, is the root of wrongdoing. By cultivating knowledge of oneself and the nature of virtue, individuals can live ethical and meaningful lives. Socrates also questioned the Athenian political system and the conventional wisdom of his time. He challenged the claims of sophists, who taught rhetoric and persuasion for personal gain, emphasizing instead the pursuit of truth over public opinion. His insistence on moral integrity and critical inquiry made him both respected and controversial in Athens. Ultimately, Socrates' commitment to philosophy led to his trial and execution in 399 BCE. Accused of corrupting the youth and impiety, he chose to accept the verdict rather than flee, demonstrating his belief in the importance of living according to principle. His death became a symbol of intellectual courage and moral steadfastness, inspiring generations of thinkers after him. Siddhartha Gautama, who would become known as the Buddha, was born in the 6th century BCE in what is now Nepal. He was a prince, raised in comfort and sheltered from the suffering of the world. Yet, despite his privileged life, he encountered the realities of aging, sickness, and death. These experiences profoundly shook him and led him to question the nature of human existence. He left his palace and the life of luxury to seek a path that would end suffering. Buddha's inquiry led him to understand that life is marked by suffering, or dukkha, which includes not only physical pain but also the impermanence and dissatisfaction inherent in all existence. He identified craving and attachment as the sources of suffering. Desire for wealth, pleasure, and even life itself binds individuals to a cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, known as samsara. To overcome suffering, one must address these root causes and cultivate insight, ethical conduct, and mental discipline. Central to Buddha's teaching are the Four Noble Truths. The first acknowledges the reality of suffering. The second identifies its central to Buddha's teaching are the Four Noble Truths. The first acknowledges the reality of suffering. The second identifies its cause in craving and attachment. The third proclaims that liberation from suffering is possible. The fourth outlines the Eightfold Path, a practical guide for ethical and mindful living. This path includes right understanding, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Together, these practices cultivate wisdom, ethical conduct, and mental focus. Buddha also emphasized the principle of impermanence, or anicca. All things, including the self, are in constant flux. Clinging to transient phenomena leads to suffering, while acceptance of change brings freedom and clarity. Similarly, he taught the principle of non-self, or anatta, which challenges the notion of a permanent, independent identity. Insight into impermanence and non-self allows individuals to reduce attachment and live with greater equanimity. Meditation and mindfulness were central to Buddha's method. Through deep contemplation, individuals can observe the mind, understand the nature of thoughts and sensations, and cultivate calm and insight. Meditation provides a practical means to apply philosophical principles, integrating understanding into daily life and transforming perception and behavior. Buddha's teachings spread rapidly throughout India and later across Asia. His philosophy offered an alternative to ritualistic and hierarchical religious systems, emphasizing direct experience, ethical conduct, and personal transformation. Buddhism integrates philosophy, psychology, and ethics, addressing the fundamental human concern of suffering and providing a systematic method to overcome it. At its core, Buddhism is both a practical and profound inquiry into the human condition. Aristotle, a student of Plato, lived during the 4th century BCE in ancient Greece and became one of the most influential philosophers in history. While Plato focused on abstract forms and ideal realities, Aristotle emphasized observation, experience, and the study of the natural world. His philosophy spans logic, metaphysics, ethics, politics, biology, and more, creating a comprehensive system that shaped both Western and Islamic philosophy for centuries. Aristotle introduced a method of reasoning known as syllogistic logic. Through careful deduction, he showed how conclusions can be drawn systematically from general premises. This method allowed thinkers to approach knowledge in a structured and rigorous way, establishing principles that remain central to philosophy and science. For Aristotle, reason and observation were both essential to understanding reality. In metaphysics, Aristotle proposed that reality consists of substances, each composed of matter and form. Matter provides the potential, while form gives actual existence and identity. Unlike Plato, Aristotle argued that forms do not exist separately from objects. By studying the world around us, we can understand the principles that govern it, bridging abstract ideas and tangible reality. Aristotle also explored causes and explanations, introducing the concept of the four causes: material, formal, efficient, and final. Material cause identifies what something is made of. Formal cause defines its structure. Efficient cause explains the agent or force that brings it about. Final cause reveals its purpose. This framework allows for a deeper understanding of why things exist and how they function, linking nature, design, and purpose in a coherent system. Ethics was another central concern for Aristotle. He proposed that the highest good for humans is eudaimonia, often translated as flourishing or well-being. Achieving this state requires cultivating virtue through reason and balanced action, known as the doctrine of the mean. Virtue lies between excess and deficiency, guiding individuals to act wisely and live harmoniously within society. Moral development, for Aristotle, is a lifelong practice, integrating knowledge, character, and habit. In politics, Aristotle analyzed various forms of government, seeking the one most conducive to human flourishing. He emphasized the importance of laws, civic participation, and the role of education in shaping virtuous citizens. His political thought reflects the belief that the good of the individual and the good of the community are closely connected. Aristotle also made pioneering contributions to natural science, classifying plants, animals, and their functions. His empirical observations, while imperfect by modern standards, demonstrated a systematic effort to understand life and the cosmos. He combined careful observation with philosophical reasoning, bridging the gap between theory and practice. With Aristotle, philosophy becomes both analytical and practical. He demonstrates that knowledge, ethics, and observation are interconnected, and that understanding the world requires both reasoning and attention to experience. His legacy endures as a foundation for logic, science, and the systematic study of human life and nature. Plato, a student of Socrates, lived in Athens during the 4th century BCE and became one of the most influential philosophers in Western history. He carried forward the methods and teachings of his teacher while developing his own system of thought, exploring questions about reality, knowledge, and the ideal forms of human life. Plato's philosophy is wide-ranging, covering ethics, politics, metaphysics, and epistemology, and it continues to shape philosophical thought to this day. Central to Plato's philosophy is the theory of forms. According to this idea, the world we perceive through our senses is only a shadow of a higher, unchanging reality. The forms are perfect, eternal, and universal concepts that exist beyond the physical world. For example, beauty, justice, and equality exist as perfect forms, while the objects and actions in our world only approximate them. Knowledge, Plato argued, is the recognition of these forms through reason, rather than mere observation of the material world. Plato's method of inquiry often took the form of dialogues, featuring Socrates as the main character. These dialogues examine fundamental questions: what is justice? What is virtue? How should a society be organized? Through careful questioning, Plato explores the nature of truth and the role of human reason in understanding it. His dialogues illustrate that philosophy is not merely a collection of answers, but a disciplined process of reflection and discussion. In his political thought, Plato emphasized the importance of justice and the ideal state. In works like The Republic, he described a society governed by philosopher kings, individuals whose wisdom and virtue qualify them to lead. According to Plato, political order is only possible when rulers understand the good and act in accordance with it. Education, moral development, and the cultivation of reason are central to creating a just society. Skepticism emerged in ancient Greece as a philosophical response to the certainty claimed by earlier thinkers. Skeptics questioned the possibility of absolute knowledge, emphasizing doubt, inquiry, and suspension of judgment. Two main forms of skepticism developed: Pyrrhonism, founded by Pyrrho of Elis in the 4th century BCE, and academic skepticism, associated with Plato's Academy during the 3rd century BCE. Both sought to guide human life through reflection on the limits of knowledge. Pyrrho, often considered the founder of skepticism, observed that appearances are often contradictory and unreliable. He argued that for every claim, there is an equally plausible counterclaim. Because humans cannot attain certainty, the wisest course is to suspend judgment, a practice known as epiky. By withholding belief, Pyrrho taught, one can avoid error, reduce anxiety, and achieve ataraxia, a state of inner calm and tranquility. Skepticism, in this sense, is both a philosophical method and a practical approach to life. Academic skeptics, influenced by Plato's Academy, focused on demonstrating that knowledge is uncertain. They argued that human reason is limited and that appearances often deceive. While less radical than Pyrrhonism, academic skepticism also promoted careful inquiry and critical examination of claims. By continuously questioning assumptions, skeptics cultivated intellectual humility and encouraged others to recognize the fallibility of human judgment. Skeptics emphasized the importance of inquiry over dogma. They maintained that rather than claiming to know the truth, philosophers should examine beliefs, arguments, and evidence critically. This approach challenges absolutism, encouraging open-mindedness, dialogue, and careful consideration of multiple perspectives. In doing so, skepticism fosters a disciplined mind capable of navigating uncertainty with composure. Stoicism emerged in Athens during the early 3rd century BCE, founded by Zeno of Citium. It became one of the most influential schools of Hellenistic philosophy, emphasizing reason, virtue, and resilience in the face of life's challenges. Stoics sought to cultivate inner freedom and tranquility by understanding the natural order of the universe and aligning their lives with it. Unlike the Cynics, who rejected society, or the Epicureans, who pursued pleasure, Stoics focused on moral discipline and rational living as the path to true contentment. At the core of Stoic philosophy is the idea that virtue is sufficient for happiness. External circumstances, wealth, health, or social status are neither inherently good nor bad. What matters is how individuals respond to events, using reason to act virtuously. By distinguishing between what is within our control and what is not, Stoics teach that we can maintain peace of mind regardless of fortune, misfortune, or the chaos of the world. The Stoics also emphasize the importance of living in accordance with nature. This principle does not refer merely to the natural world but to the rational order underlying reality. Humans, as rational beings, fulfill their purpose by using reason to understand the world and act in harmony with it. This includes cultivating wisdom, courage, justice, and self-discipline, the 4 cardinal virtues identified by the Stoics. Stoic practice involves careful attention to thought, emotion, and action. By reflecting on one's beliefs, anticipating challenges, and accepting the inevitability of change, individuals develop resilience and clarity. Techniques such as negative visualization, which considers the loss of what one values, help prepare the mind for adversity and reduce attachment. Daily reflection and self-examination allow Stoics to live intentionally, shaping character rather than being shaped by circumstance. Famous Stoic philosophers include Seneca, Epicurus, and the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius. Each emphasized the application of Stoic principles to everyday life, showing that philosophy is not only theoretical but practical. Seneca wrote about the importance of time, virtue, and ethical living. Epicurus, a former slave, taught that freedom comes from mastering one's desires and judgments. Marcus Aurelius applied Stoicism to leadership, demonstrating how reason and virtue guide decision-making in the public sphere. Stoicism also addresses the nature of emotion. Stoics do not advocate suppression of feeling but transformation. By understanding the causes of anger, fear, and desire, individuals can respond rationally rather than react impulsively. This allows for emotional resilience and the cultivation of equanimity, a state of calm wisdom even amid life's difficulties. With the Stoics, philosophy becomes a comprehensive guide to life. It teaches that happiness is found not in external circumstances but in the disciplined exercise of reason, the cultivation of virtue, and acceptance of the natural order. Stoicism demonstrates that a life aligned with reason and moral integrity is both resilient and fulfilling, offering enduring guidance for anyone seeking wisdom and peace in a complex and unpredictable world. Epicurus, who lived in Athens during the 4th and 3rd centuries BCE, founded a school of philosophy focused on the pursuit of happiness and the alleviation of human suffering. Unlike the Cynics, who emphasized asceticism and radical self-denial, Epicurus taught that the ultimate goal of life is pleasure, but not in the sense of indulgence or excess. For Epicurus, true pleasure is the absence of pain, both physical and mental, and the cultivation of peace of mind, or ataraxia. Epicurus argued that much human suffering arises from unnecessary desires, fears, and false beliefs. He encouraged the practice of simple living, moderation, and the cultivation of friendships as essential to achieving happiness. Material comfort was acceptable only insofar as it contributed to health and tranquility, while excessive wealth, luxury, and ambition were seen as sources of anxiety and disturbance. Central to Epicurean philosophy is the understanding of the natural world. Epicurus adopted a form of atomism, building on the ideas of Democritus, proposing that all things, including the soul, consist of tiny, indivisible particles called atoms moving in the void. By explaining natural phenomena through reason and observation rather than superstition, Epicurus sought to eliminate fear, particularly the fear of gods and death. He taught that the gods exist but are indifferent to human affairs, and that death is simply the cessation of sensation, not a source of punishment or suffering. Epicurus emphasized the careful management of desires. He distinguished between natural and necessary desires, such as the need for food and shelter, which should be satisfied, natural but unnecessary desires, like indulgent foods, which should be limited, and vain or empty desires, like wealth, fame, or power, which should be avoided entirely. By focusing on what is natural and necessary, individuals can reduce anxiety and experience lasting contentment. The Cynics were a school of philosophy that emerged in ancient Greece during the 4th century BCE, challenging conventional values, social norms, and material attachment. Their philosophy was founded by Antisthenes, a student of Socrates, and later popularized by Diogenes of Sinope, who became the most famous representative of the movement. The Cynics believed that virtue and freedom could be achieved through simplicity, self-sufficiency, and a rejection of societal pretensions. Cynicism arose as a response to the perceived corruption and artificiality of Greek society. Cynics rejected wealth, luxury, and social status, arguing that these distractions prevent individuals from living a virtuous life. They believed that human happiness does not depend on external possessions, but on inner freedom and the cultivation of character. By stripping away unnecessary desires, a person could live in accordance with nature and attain true independence. Diogenes, the most famous Cynic, embodied these principles in his life. He reportedly lived in a large ceramic jar, owned almost nothing, and openly challenged social conventions. His provocative actions were meant to illustrate the emptiness of materialism and the importance of living authentically. Diogenes emphasized that wisdom is not measured by wealth or fame but by the ability to live virtuously and according to reason. Cynics also valued honesty and directness. They believed in speaking truthfully and acting in ways that reflect moral integrity, regardless of social approval. This often led them to confront authority, ridicule pretension, and challenge established norms. Their philosophy combined ethical rigor with a form of social critique, demonstrating that philosophy is not merely theoretical but a guide to living boldly and authentically. Augustine of Hippo lived during the 4th and early 5th centuries CE, at a time when the Roman world was undergoing profound political, cultural, and religious transformation. Born in North Africa, he was educated in rhetoric and philosophy and spent much of his early life searching for truth through various intellectual traditions. His journey led him through skepticism, Manichaeism, and Neoplatonism before his eventual conversion to Christianity, a turning point that shaped Western philosophy and theology for centuries. Augustine's thought represents a synthesis of classical philosophy and Christian belief. Deeply influenced by Plato and Plotinus, he believed that truth is not found in the external world alone but within the human soul. For Augustine, self-examination becomes a path to understanding God, as the mind reflects the divine order. This inward turn marked a significant shift in philosophical inquiry, emphasizing introspection as a means of discovering truth. Central to Augustine's philosophy is the concept of God as the ultimate source of being, truth, and goodness. God exists beyond time and change, while the material world is finite and imperfect. Augustine argued that evil is not a substance but a privation of good, arising when human will turns away from divine order. This idea allowed him to reconcile the existence of suffering with belief in a benevolent and omnipotent God. Augustine placed great emphasis on the human will and moral responsibility. He believed that humans are free to choose, yet deeply affected by sin, which distorts desire and judgment. True freedom, according to Augustine, is not the ability to do whatever one wishes, but the capacity to will what is good. Divine grace plays a crucial role in restoring the will, enabling humans to pursue virtue and spiritual fulfillment. Time was another central concern in Augustine's philosophy. In his reflections, he questioned the nature of past, present, and future, arguing that time exists primarily in human consciousness. The past lives in memory, the future in expectation, and the present in attention. This psychological understanding of time influenced later philosophical and theological discussions, shaping debates far beyond his era. Augustine's political philosophy is most clearly expressed in his distinction between the city of God and the city of man. The city of man is driven by pride, power, and earthly desire, while the city of God is guided by love, humility, and devotion to divine truth. History, for Augustine, is a moral drama shaped by these two orientations of the human will. With Augustine, philosophy becomes a deeply personal and spiritual inquiry. He transformed ancient metaphysics into a reflection on inner life, will, and faith. His ideas laid the foundations of medieval philosophy and shaped Western views on morality, time, selfhood, and God. Augustine stands as a bridge between classical philosophy and Christian thought, redefining the philosophical search for truth as a journey of the soul toward divine understanding. Plotinus, who lived during the 3rd century CE, is widely regarded as the founder of Neoplatonism, a philosophical system that reshaped the understanding of reality, the soul, and the divine. Born in Roman Egypt, he studied philosophy in Alexandria before establishing his own school in Rome. Plotinus sought to explore the relationship between the material world, the human soul, and the ultimate source of all existence, known as the One. At the center of Plotinus' philosophy is the concept of the One, an absolute and ineffable source beyond all description. The One transcends being, thought, and multiplicity, yet it is the origin of everything. From the One emanates the nous, or divine intellect, which contains the perfect forms and organizes reality. From the nous flows the world soul, which animates the cosmos and connects all living beings. Through this hierarchy, Plotinus explains how the diverse world emerges from a single, unified source. Human beings, according to Plotinus, possess a soul that is capable of returning to the One. The soul is trapped in the material world, subject to distraction, desire, and illusion. Philosophical contemplation, virtue, and ascetic practice enable the soul to ascend beyond sensory experience, reconnecting with higher reality. Through meditation and the pursuit of wisdom, individuals can transcend the material, cultivate inner harmony, and achieve union with the divine. Plotinus emphasized the role of beauty and intellect in spiritual ascent. The experience of true beauty, whether in nature, art, or moral virtue, awakens the soul to its divine origin. Knowledge and contemplation elevate the mind, allowing it to perceive the forms within the nous. This process transforms the individual, moving from the fragmented perception of the material world toward unity with the eternal and the absolute. Alongside Confucianism, early China saw the emergence of diverse philosophical schools that challenged and complemented its ideas. These non-Confucian philosophies arose during the tumultuous Warring States period, a time marked by political instability, social upheaval, and the search for order. Thinkers sought practical solutions to the problems of governance, ethics, and human conduct, developing systems that were often radically different from the moral and ritual focus of Confucian thought. One of the most influential non-Confucian schools was legalism. Thinkers like Han Fei and Shang Yang emphasized the strict application of law and the centralization of power. Legalists argued that human nature is self-interested and prone to disorder, requiring clear rules, harsh punishments, and effective state control to maintain stability. Unlike Confucianism, which relied on moral education and virtue, legalism focused on tangible structures, laws, and authority. It shaped the foundation of the Qin dynasty, demonstrating the effectiveness of governance based on law rather than ethics alone. Moism, founded by Mozi, presented yet another approach. Mahists criticized the Confucian emphasis on elaborate rituals and social hierarchy, advocating instead for universal love, frugality, and practical benefit. They argued that actions should be judged by their consequences, particularly whether they reduce harm and promote social welfare. Moism combined ethical concern with a utilitarian pragmatism, emphasizing that good governance arises from care for all people equally rather than favoritism toward family or class. Taoism, while sometimes associated with Laozi and Zhuangzi, also functioned as a non-Confucian philosophy. Taoists emphasized harmony with the natural order, spontaneity, and the principle of wu-wei, or effortless action. Rather than imposing rigid social structures or moral codes, Taoism advocated alignment with the rhythms of the cosmos. It presented an alternative to the Confucian focus on human-centered virtue, exploring the balance between humanity and nature, simplicity, and the cultivation of inner freedom. These non-Confucian philosophies shared a concern with the practical challenges of life and governance, but they approached them differently. Legalism focused on order through law and authority, Moism on ethical consequences and universal care, and Taoism on natural harmony and personal alignment with the cosmos. Together, they reflect the intellectual diversity of early China and the intense debate over how humans should live, act, and govern. Non-Confucian thought demonstrates that philosophy is not a single path but a dialogue of perspectives. These schools challenged assumptions, tested ideas against reality, and offered alternatives to moral idealism. They remind us that questions of ethics, governance, and human flourishing can be approached in multiple ways, each providing insight into the nature of society, power, and life itself. With non-Confucian philosophy, Chinese thought becomes pluralistic and experimental. It shows that human wisdom can emerge not only from tradition and ritual but also from law, reason, and alignment with nature. These ideas continue to inform debates about ethics, politics, and personal conduct, revealing a rich intellectual landscape that extends far beyond any single philosophy. Asoka, also known as Asoka the Great, ruled the Mauryan Empire in India during the 3rd century BCE. He inherited one of the largest empires in the subcontinent, stretching from the Himalayas to the southern tip of India. Early in his reign, Asoka waged wars of conquest, consolidating power through military campaigns that brought vast territories under his control. One of the most infamous of these was the Kalinga War, which left a profound impact on him and the course of his life. The brutality and human cost of the Kalinga campaign led Asoka to a deep personal transformation. Confronted with the suffering he had caused, he turned away from violence and embraced Buddhism as a guide for ethical governance. He sought to rule not through fear or force, but through moral example and the promotion of dharma, principles of righteousness, duty, and compassion. Asoka's embrace of Buddhism had profound political and cultural consequences. He promoted the spread of Buddhist teachings across his empire, commissioning the construction of stupas, monasteries, and pillars inscribed with edicts that conveyed his moral and administrative vision. These edicts emphasized nonviolence, respect for life, tolerance of all religions, and concern for the welfare of his subjects. Asoka sought to unify his diverse empire not through coercion but through shared ethical principles. One of Asoka's lasting legacies was his emphasis on dharmic governance. He encouraged officials to act with integrity, administer justice fairly, and protect the weak. He advocated for humane treatment of prisoners, welfare of animals, and care for travelers and the poor. Asoka demonstrated that political power could be guided by moral principles and that the ruler's responsibility extended beyond conquest to the cultivation of ethical and just society. Al-Ghazali, known in full as Abu Hamid Muhammad al-Ghazali, lived during the 11th century CE and is one of the most influential thinkers in Islamic intellectual history. Trained in law, theology, and philosophy, he rose quickly to prominence as a scholar in Baghdad. Yet at the height of his success, he experienced a deep personal and spiritual crisis that transformed both his life and his thought. Al-Ghazali's philosophy is shaped by his search for certainty. He examined theology, philosophy, and mysticism, questioning whether reason alone could lead to truth. This inquiry led him to criticize the philosophers of his time, particularly those influenced by Aristotle and Avicenna. In his famous work The Incoherence of the Philosophers, Al-Ghazali argued that human reason has limits and cannot independently establish metaphysical truths such as the eternity of the world or the nature of God. Despite his criticism, Al-Ghazali did not reject reason entirely. He accepted logic and rational inquiry as valuable tools, especially in science and law. However, he insisted that reason must remain subordinate to revelation and spiritual insight. For Al-Ghazali, philosophy becomes dangerous when it claims absolute certainty in matters beyond human comprehension. One of Al-Ghazali's most influential ideas concerns causality. He argued that what humans perceive as cause and effect is not a necessary connection but a habitual association. Fire does not inherently cause cotton to burn, rather, God creates both the fire and the burning simultaneously. This view emphasizes divine omnipotence and challenges the philosophical assumption that nature operates independently of God's will. Al-Ghazali ultimately found resolution in Sufism, the mystical tradition of Islam. Through spiritual discipline, self-purification, and inner experience, he believed that one could attain direct knowledge of divine truth. His major work The Revival of the Religious Sciences integrates law, ethics, theology, and mysticism into a unified vision of Islamic life. In it, philosophy is not rejected but transformed into a tool for moral and spiritual refinement. Ethically, Al-Ghazali emphasized intention over outward action. True virtue arises from inner sincerity and awareness of God, not merely from external compliance with rules. The purification of the heart becomes central to human flourishing, aligning personal conduct with spiritual truth. Al-Ghazali's influence extended far beyond his lifetime. He reshaped Islamic theology, curbed the dominance of speculative philosophy, and established a lasting synthesis between law and mysticism. His critiques provoked responses from later philosophers such as Ibn Rushd, generating one of the most important intellectual debates in medieval history. With Al-Ghazali, philosophy confronts its own limits. He reminds us that while reason is powerful, it is not self-sufficient. True understanding, in his view, requires humility, spiritual discipline, and recognition of the divine source of all knowledge. His legacy endures as a profound reflection on faith, reason, and the search for certainty. Avicenna, known in the Islamic world as Ibn Sina, lived during the late 10th and early 11th centuries CE and stands as one of the most influential philosophers and physicians in history. Born in Central Asia, he mastered logic, medicine, metaphysics, and natural science at a young age. His work represents the height of classical Islamic philosophy and played a decisive role in transmitting Greek thought to both the Islamic and European worlds. Avicenna sought to unite Aristotelian philosophy with Islamic theology through reasoned analysis. At the center of his philosophy is the distinction between essence and existence. He argued that the essence of a thing is what it is, while existence is the fact that it is. Most things, according to Avicenna, are contingent. They do not exist by necessity and could just as easily not exist at all. Their existence depends on something else. This distinction leads to Avicenna's famous argument for the necessary being. If everything were contingent, then nothing would ultimately exist. Therefore, there must be a being whose essence includes existence itself. This being exists necessarily and depends on nothing else. Avicenna identified this necessary being with God, not as a physical entity, but as pure existence and ultimate cause. Avicenna also developed a sophisticated psychology of the soul. He argued that the human soul is immaterial and distinct from the body. One of his most famous thought experiments, the flying man, imagines a person created fully formed and suspended in the air, without any sensory input. Avicenna claimed that such a person would still be aware of their own existence, demonstrating that self-awareness does not depend on the body. This argument deeply influenced later debates about consciousness and identity. In Ethics and Knowledge, Avicenna emphasized the role of intellect. Human understanding progresses from sensory perception to rational insight, culminating in contact with the active intellect, a cosmic source of intelligibility. True knowledge elevates the soul and aligns it with higher reality. Intellectual and moral development are inseparable, as understanding reality leads to virtuous action. Avicenna's medical work was equally influential. His Canon of Medicine became a standard text in Europe and the Islamic world for centuries. It combined observation, logic, and systematic classification, shaping medical practice long after his time. This integration of philosophy and science reflects Avicenna's belief that reason is the key to understanding both nature and the human condition. Avicenna's ideas shaped later Islamic philosophy, influencing thinkers such as Al-Farabi and provoking critical responses from Al-Ghazali. Through translations, his works entered medieval Europe, shaping scholastic philosophy and thinkers like Thomas Aquinas. With Avicenna, philosophy becomes a bridge between faith and reason. He demonstrates that rational inquiry can deepen understanding of existence, the soul, and the divine. His legacy endures as a testament to the power of intellect, showing how careful reasoning can illuminate both the structure of reality and the nature of human self-awareness. Maimonides, known in Hebrew as Moses ben Maimon and in the Latin world as Maimonides, lived during the 12th century CE. He was born in Islamic Spain and later lived in North Africa and Egypt. A philosopher, legal scholar, and physician, Maimonides stands as one of the greatest Jewish thinkers of the medieval world, bridging Greek philosophy, Islamic thought, and Jewish theology. At the center of Maimonides' philosophy is the conviction that reason and revelation cannot ultimately contradict each other. Deeply influenced by Aristotle and the rational tradition preserved by Islamic philosophers such as Avicenna and Averroes, he believed that philosophical inquiry strengthens religious understanding. When scripture appears to conflict with reason, Maimonides argued, it must be interpreted metaphorically rather than literally. Maimonides is best known for the Guide for the Perplexed, a work written for those struggling to reconcile philosophical reasoning with religious faith. In it, he emphasizes negative theology, the idea that God cannot be described by positive attributes. To say that God is wise or powerful risks imposing human limitations on the divine. Instead, Maimonides held that we can only describe God by stating what God is not, preserving divine transcendence and unity. Like Aristotle, Maimonides viewed God as pure intellect and the ultimate cause of existence. He argued that God is absolutely simple, without parts or composition. Any attempt to attribute human qualities to God, he believed, leads to misunderstanding and idolatry. True worship begins with intellectual humility and disciplined understanding. Maimonides also developed a rational account of ethics and human perfection. He believed that the highest human goal is intellectual understanding of God, achieved through moral discipline and philosophical study. Ethical behavior trains the soul, purifies desire, and prepares the mind for knowledge. Law and commandments, in this view, serve a rational purpose by guiding human behavior toward balance and virtue. In addition to philosophy, Maimonides made lasting contributions to Jewish law. His Mishneh Torah systematized centuries of legal tradition into a clear and organized code, making religious law accessible and practical. This work established him as a central authority in Jewish legal thought, shaping practice long after his lifetime. Maimonides' influence extended beyond Judaism. His ideas were studied by Christian scholastics such as Thomas Aquinas and engaged by Islamic thinkers. His commitment to rational clarity, intellectual rigor, and religious devotion made him a key figure in the shared philosophical heritage of the medieval world. With Maimonides, philosophy becomes an act of disciplined understanding. He shows that faith does not require the rejection of reason, but its careful and respectful use. His legacy stands as a testament to the power of intellect guided by humility, offering a vision of human fulfillment grounded in knowledge, virtue, and devotion. Averroes, known in the Islamic world as Ibn Rushd, lived during the 12th century CE in Islamic Spain. He was a philosopher, jurist, and physician whose work represents one of the most rigorous defenses of reason in medieval thought. Writing in response to critics of philosophy, particularly Al-Ghazali, Averroes sought to demonstrate that rational inquiry and religious faith are not opposed but complementary paths to truth. At the heart of Averroes' philosophy is his interpretation of Aristotle. He believed that Aristotle offered the most complete account of nature, logic, and metaphysics, and he devoted much of his life to producing detailed commentaries on Aristotle's works. Through these writings, Averroes preserved and clarified Greek philosophy at a time when it was under increasing suspicion in the Islamic world. Averroes argued that philosophy is not only permissible but necessary for those capable of rational inquiry. In his work The Decisive Treatise, he claimed that the Quran encourages reflection and the use of reason. Apparent conflicts between scripture and philosophy, he argued, arise from misunderstanding. When properly interpreted, revelation and reason ultimately lead to the same truth. Averroes strongly rejected Al-Ghazali's critique of causality. He defended the idea that natural causes operate according to stable laws established by God. Denying causality, he argued, undermines both science and meaningful knowledge. For Averroes, understanding nature through reason honors the divine order rather than threatening it. One of the most controversial aspects of Averroes' thought concerns the intellect. He proposed that the active intellect is universal rather than individual, shared by all humans. This view, later known as the doctrine of the unity of the intellect, sparked intense debate and was criticized by both Islamic and Christian thinkers. Despite controversy, it highlighted Averroes' commitment to intellectual rigor and consistency. Nagarjuna was one of the most influential philosophers in the history of Buddhism, active around the 2nd century CE. He is widely regarded as the founder of the Madhyamaka, or Middle Way, school of Mahayana Buddhism. Nagarjuna's work reshaped Buddhist philosophy by offering a radical analysis of reality, language, and causation, challenging deeply rooted assumptions about existence itself. At the center of Nagarjuna's philosophy is the doctrine of emptiness, or shunyata. He argued that all phenomena are empty of inherent, independent essence. Things do not exist by themselves or from their own nature. Instead, they arise dependently, through causes, conditions, and conceptual designation. This insight does not deny the existence of the world but reveals its relational and contingent character. Nagarjuna developed this view through rigorous logical argumentation. In his most famous work, the Mulamadhyamakarika, he systematically dismantles claims that things exist permanently, exist independently, or do not exist at all. By rejecting both absolute existence and absolute non-existence, Nagarjuna establishes the middle way, avoiding extremes and preserving the practical relevance of Buddhist teaching. Emptiness, for Nagarjuna, is not a metaphysical substance or hidden reality. It is a way of understanding how things function. Because phenomena lack fixed essence, change, interaction, and liberation are possible. Attachment and suffering arise when people mistakenly treat things as permanent and self-existing. Insight into emptiness dissolves these mistaken views and frees the mind from grasping. Nagarjuna also emphasized the inseparability of conventional truth and ultimate truth. On the conventional level, everyday language, ethics, and causation function normally. On the ultimate level, all such distinctions are empty. These two truths are not separate realities but complementary perspectives. Without conventional truth, communication and practice are impossible. Without ultimate truth, liberation cannot be achieved. Ethically, Nagarjuna's philosophy reinforces compassion. Recognizing that all beings are interdependent undermines ego-centered thinking and supports the bodhisattva ideal. Wisdom and compassion arise together, as insight into emptiness naturally leads to concern for others and freedom from self-centered attachment. Nagarjuna's influence extends far beyond his time. His ideas shaped later Mahayana schools across India, China, Tibet, and East Asia. Tibetan Buddhism, in particular, regards Nagarjuna as a foundational authority. His method of critical analysis influenced debates on logic, language, and metaphysics across cultures. With Nagarjuna, philosophy becomes a tool for liberation rather than speculation. His work demonstrates that freedom arises not from constructing new theories of reality, but from dismantling the false assumptions that bind the mind. By revealing the emptiness of all fixed views, Nagarjuna offers a path toward clarity, compassion, and profound inner freedom. Mahayana Buddhism emerged several centuries after the death of the Buddha, developing as a major movement within Buddhist thought around the 1st century BCE. While rooted in the original teachings of the Buddha, Mahayana introduced new interpretations of enlightenment, compassion, and the nature of reality. It spread widely across Central Asia, China, Korea, Japan, and later Tibet, shaping much of East Asian spiritual and philosophical life. At the heart of Mahayana Buddhism is the ideal of the bodhisattva. Unlike earlier traditions that emphasized personal liberation, Mahayana teaches that the highest spiritual goal is to seek enlightenment not only for oneself but for all sentient beings. A bodhisattva delays final liberation in order to help others escape suffering, embodying limitless compassion and wisdom. This shift transformed the ethical focus of Buddhism from individual release to universal responsibility. Mahayana philosophy expanded Buddhist metaphysics through profound reflections on emptiness, or shunyata. Thinkers such as Nagarjuna argued that all phenomena lack inherent, independent existence. Things exist only in relation to causes, conditions, and perception. This teaching does not deny reality but challenges rigid notions of permanence and essence. By understanding emptiness, practitioners overcome attachment and see the world with clarity and compassion. Another key development in Mahayana thought is the concept of Buddha nature. According to this idea, all beings possess the potential for enlightenment. Awakening is not reserved for monks or ascetics but is accessible to everyone. This inclusive vision encouraged devotional practices, meditation, and ethical living among lay communities, broadening Buddhism's social and cultural reach. Advaita Vedanta is one of the most influential schools of Indian philosophy, systematized in the 8th century CE by Adi Shankaracharya. Rooted in the ancient Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, and the Brahma Sutras, Advaita presents a radical vision of reality. Its central claim is that ultimate reality is non-dual. There is only one truth, called Brahman, and everything else is a manifestation of it. According to Advaita Vedanta, the world of multiplicity that humans experience is not absolutely real. It is shaped by ignorance, or avidya, which causes individuals to perceive separation where none truly exists. The self, or Atman, is not separate from Brahman. The famous Advaitic insight, Tat Tvam Asi, meaning, that thou art, expresses this unity. The individual self and the ultimate reality are fundamentally identical. Adi Shankaracharya emphasized that liberation, or moksha, is achieved through knowledge rather than ritual action or devotion alone. This knowledge is not intellectual information but direct realization of one's true nature. When ignorance is removed, the illusion of separation dissolves, and the individual recognizes their unity with Brahman. Liberation is not a future event but a present awakening. Advaita distinguishes between two levels of reality. The empirical level is the everyday world of change, cause, and effect. The absolute level is Brahman, which is eternal, unchanging, and beyond all attributes. The empirical world is described as Maya, not meaning it is unreal, but that it is transient and dependent. Like a mirage or a dream, it appears real until true knowledge reveals its nature. Shankaracharya used rigorous logic and debate to defend Advaita against rival philosophical schools. He traveled widely across India, establishing monastic centers and revitalizing philosophical inquiry. David Hume, born in 1711 in Scotland, is one of the most influential figures in modern philosophy. A central figure of the Scottish Enlightenment, Hume reshaped the study of human understanding, morality, and knowledge. His work challenges assumptions about reason, experience, and the nature of reality, leaving a lasting impact on philosophy, science, and the social sciences. At the core of Hume's philosophy is empiricism, the idea that all knowledge arises from experience. Hume distinguishes between impressions, which are vivid sensory experiences, and ideas, which are the faint images of these impressions in thought. For Hume, the mind does not possess innate ideas, everything we know begins with observation, perception, or feeling. Experience is the foundation of human understanding. Hume is best known for his analysis of causation and human reasoning. He argued that cause and effect are not rationally certain but are habits of thought formed through repeated observation. We do not perceive necessary connections in nature, rather, we expect regularity based on experience. This insight challenges the assumption that reason alone can reveal the laws of nature, emphasizing the limits of human knowledge. In addition to epistemology, Hume explored human nature and morality. He argued that reason alone cannot motivate action, rather, emotions and passions drive behavior. Morality arises from sentiment, sympathy, and social feeling, not from abstract principles or divine command. Virtue and justice, he suggests, are valued because they promote social harmony and the well-being of others, reflecting the natural instincts of human beings. Hume also examined religion with critical rigor. He questioned claims of miracles, divine intervention, and the rationality of theological doctrines. By applying empirical analysis and careful reasoning, Hume demonstrated that religious belief often relies on custom, tradition, and psychological tendencies rather than evidence. George Berkeley, born in 1685 in Ireland, was one of the most original philosophers of the early modern period. Known for his contributions to metaphysics and epistemology, Berkeley challenged the assumptions of materialism and offered a radical new understanding of reality, perception, and the relationship between mind and world. His philosophy remains a cornerstone of idealist thought. At the heart of Berkeley's philosophy is the claim that material objects do not exist independently of perception. In his famous dictum, Ses percipi, he asserts that to exist is to be perceived. Objects, he argues, are collections of sensory qualities, colors, shapes, textures, that exist only in the minds of perceivers. Without perception, there is no independent material substance. Berkeley developed this idea in response to the growing influence of mechanical philosophy and the skepticism of his time. Thinkers like John Locke and the early empiricists argued that knowledge begins with sensory experience, but often assumed that a material world exists independently. Berkeley challenged this assumption, insisting that the notion of matter as something existing outside perception is incoherent. According to Berkeley, the consistency and order of the world are maintained by God. God perceives all things continuously, ensuring their stability and coherence even when no human observer is present. In this way, Berkeley preserves both empirical observation and divine providence, uniting philosophy and theology in a single framework. Berkeley's philosophy has important consequences for understanding knowledge and perception. Humans do not encounter a world of independent matter, but a world of ideas presented to the mind. Knowledge is thus always mediated by perception and interpretation. Reality is not external in the material sense, but experiential and relational, dependent on the mind and, ultimately, on God. Mary Wollstonecraft, born in 1759 in England, is one of the earliest and most influential advocates for women's rights. Writing during a period of revolutionary thought in Europe, she challenged traditional assumptions about gender, education, and social hierarchy. Wollstonecraft argued that society's limitations on women were neither natural nor necessary, but imposed by custom, ignorance, and prejudice. At the heart of Wollstonecraft's philosophy is the conviction that women possess the same capacity for reason, virtue, and moral judgment as men. She observed that women were often confined to superficial accomplishments and domestic roles, trained to please rather than to think independently. These constraints, she argued, weaken society as a whole by preventing half of humanity from contributing fully to civic, intellectual, and moral life. Her most famous work, A Vindication of the Rights of Woman, published in 1792, presents a systematic critique of social norms. Wollstonecraft challenges the prevailing belief that women are naturally inferior to men. Instead, she claims that the apparent weakness or passivity of women results from the lack of education and opportunity. Given the same training in reason and virtue, women are equally capable of intellectual and moral achievement. Education, according to Wollstonecraft, is the key to equality. She advocates for a rigorous system of schooling that cultivates critical thinking, moral responsibility, and practical knowledge. Women should not only learn domestic skills but also mathematics, science, literature, and philosophy. By fostering independence of thought, education enables women to participate as equals in society and to make informed decisions for themselves and their communities. Wollstonecraft also critiques social and political institutions that maintain inequality. She challenges the legal and cultural restrictions that prevent women from owning property, entering professions, or engaging in political life. Her vision extends beyond individual education to a transformation of society structures, emphasizing justice, rationality, and equal opportunity. Despite her advocacy for women, Wollstonecraft does not call for rebellion or disorder. Her arguments are rooted in reason and morality, appealing to Enlightenment principles of liberty, equality, and human dignity. She frames her critique not as a confrontation, but as an ethical and rational necessity. A society that limits women's potential limits its own progress. Wollstonecraft's influence extends far beyond her lifetime. Her writings inspired later feminists, suffragists, and advocates for universal education. By insisting on the moral and intellectual equality of women, she challenged centuries of tradition and laid the philosophical foundations for modern feminism. Mary Wollstonecraft demonstrates that social reform begins with reason, education, and courage. She shows that equality is not a radical ideal, but a necessary condition for justice, virtue, and human flourishing. Her legacy continues to shape debates about gender, society, and the power of education, reminding us that rational thought and moral insight know no gender. Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, born in 1646 in Germany, was one of the most versatile thinkers of the 17th century. A philosopher, mathematician, logician, and diplomat, he contributed to multiple fields while developing a metaphysical system that sought to reconcile reason, science, and theology. Leibniz represents a synthesis of rationalist thought, extending the work of Descartes and Spinoza while offering a uniquely optimistic view of the universe. At the core of Leibniz's philosophy is the concept of monads. He argued that the universe is composed of simple, indivisible substances called monads, which are not material but spiritual in nature. Each monad reflects the entire universe from its own perspective, and while monads do not interact causally, they operate in a pre-established harmony arranged by God. This framework unites metaphysics, theology, and the natural order in a single system. Leibniz's philosophy addresses the problem of causation and free will. Human beings, like all monads, follow a divine order, yet they possess the capacity for rational choice. Freedom is understood not as independence from causality, but as alignment with reason and understanding of one's place within the universe. Morality, for Leibniz, is inseparable from rational comprehension of the greater cosmic order. Leibniz also advanced the principle of sufficient reason, which states that nothing occurs without a reason. Every fact, event, or occurrence has an explanation, whether known or unknown to humans. This principle underpins his optimism. The universe exists as it does because it is the best possible arrangement given all constraints. Despite suffering and apparent imperfections, the world is structured according to divine intelligence, balancing complexity, order, and harmony. In addition to metaphysics, Leibniz made lasting contributions to mathematics and science. John Locke, born in 1632 in England, is widely regarded as the father of modern liberal thought. Writing during a period of political turbulence, civil war, and a glorious revolution, Locke sought to understand human nature, government, and the origins of authority. His work laid the foundation for modern democracy, constitutional government, and ideas of individual liberty. At the core of Locke's philosophy is the theory of human understanding. Locke argued that the mind at birth is a tabula rasa, a blank slate. Knowledge is not innate but acquired through experience. Sensory perception and reflection provide the raw material from which reason builds understanding. This empiricist view challenged centuries of scholastic and rationalist assumptions, placing observation and experience at the center of human knowledge. Locke's political philosophy is closely linked to his view of human nature. He believed that humans are generally reasonable and capable of cooperation, but they also possess self-interest and desires that can lead to conflict. In the absence of government, people live in a state of equality and freedom, but not always security. Property, life, and liberty remain vulnerable without agreed-upon rules and protection. To resolve this, Locke proposed the social contract. Individuals consent to form governments that protect natural rights, life, liberty, and property. Unlike Hobbes, Locke argued that government exists with the consent of the governed and can be legitimately overthrown if it fails to uphold its responsibilities. Political authority is not absolute, it is conditional and accountable. Locke also emphasized the separation of powers. Legislative and executive authority should be distinct, limiting the concentration of power and preventing abuse. Laws must serve the common good and respect individual rights. This framework influenced modern constitutional design, balancing order with liberty. Thomas Hobbes, born in 1588 in England, lived through one of the most turbulent periods in European history. Civil war, political upheaval, and social unrest shaped his thinking about human nature, society, and authority. Hobbes is remembered as one of the first modern political philosophers to approach the question of government systematically, using reason to understand the necessity of order. At the heart of Hobbes' philosophy lies a clear view of human nature. He described humans as self-interested, driven by desires for survival, power, and security. Left unchecked, these desires lead to conflict, competition, and fear. Without a central authority, Hobbes argued, life would be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Human beings, he believed, naturally seek peace but require structure to achieve it. To escape this state of perpetual conflict, Hobbes proposed the social contract. Individuals willingly surrender certain freedoms to a sovereign authority in exchange for security and protection. This agreement is not moral or divine in origin, but rational. The sovereign, whether a monarch or assembly, holds absolute power to enforce laws and maintain order. Only a strong, centralized authority can prevent society from descending into chaos. Hobbes also emphasized the necessity of law. Laws are not inherently moral, they are instruments of control designed to regulate behavior and preserve peace. Justice and injustice, in his view, exist only within the framework established by the sovereign. Without this authority, moral concepts lose meaning, and society cannot function. In addition to political philosophy, Hobbes applied rational analysis to other areas of thought. He considered human psychology, the nature of desire, and even the mechanics of motion, reflecting the scientific influences of his era. Hobbes sought a universal, systematic approach to understanding both nature and society, applying reason in a way that would later influence social science. Baruch Spinoza stands as one of the most radical and systematic thinkers of the early modern period. Writing in the 17th century, he extended the rationalist project begun by Descartes, but drew conclusions that challenged traditional religion, morality, and human self-understanding. Spinoza sought to explain reality as a single, unified system governed by necessity rather than divine intervention or human freedom as commonly understood. Spinoza rejected the idea of a personal, transcendent God who intervenes in the world. Instead, he argued that God and nature are one and the same. This view, often described as pantheism, identified the divine with the totality of existence. Everything that exists follows necessarily from the nature of this single substance. Nothing occurs by chance, and nothing exists outside the order of nature. According to Spinoza, there is only one substance, which possesses infinite attributes. Humans perceive only two of these, thought and extension. Mind and body are not separate substances, as Descartes believed, but two ways of understanding the same reality. Every mental event corresponds to a physical event, not through interaction, but through parallel expression of the same underlying substance. This metaphysical framework led Spinoza to a deterministic view of the universe. Human actions, emotions, and desires are governed by the same natural laws as all other phenomena. Free will, in the traditional sense, is an illusion arising from ignorance of the causes that determine human behavior. True freedom, for Spinoza, does not mean acting without causes, but understanding the causes that shape one's actions. Spinoza's ethical philosophy is grounded in this understanding of nature. Human beings are driven by a fundamental striving to persist in their existence. Emotions arise from how external forces affect this striving. Negative emotions such as fear and hatred result from inadequate understanding, while positive emotions arise from clear and rational knowledge. The highest good is intellectual understanding of nature and of one's place within it. Through reason, individuals can free themselves from destructive passions and achieve a state of rational peace. This ethical ideal emphasizes self-understanding rather than moral obedience. Virtue is not obedience to divine commands, but living in accordance with reason and necessity. Spinoza also applied his rationalism to religion and politics. He argued that sacred texts should be interpreted historically rather than literally. Religious authority, he claimed, should not control philosophical inquiry. In political thought, Spinoza defended freedom of thought and expression as essential for social stability and human flourishing. Spinoza's ideas were deeply controversial in his lifetime. He was excommunicated from his religious community and widely condemned. Yet his influence grew over time. His vision of a rational, unified reality shaped later philosophy, including Enlightenment thought and modern conceptions of ethics and freedom. Baruch Spinoza presented a universe without miracles, without supernatural intervention, and without arbitrary authority. In its place, he offered a vision of reality governed by reason, necessity, and understanding, where human freedom emerges through knowledge rather than will. René Descartes occupies a central position in the history of modern philosophy. Living during the early scientific revolution, he sought to establish knowledge on foundations so secure that doubt would no longer threaten it. While earlier thinkers focused on observation and experiment, Descartes turned inward, examining the nature of reason itself. His work marked the beginning of modern rationalism. Descartes believed that much of what humans accept as true rests on uncertain grounds. Tradition, sensory experience, and authority, he argued, are all vulnerable to error. To overcome this, he proposed a radical method of inquiry known as methodological doubt. Instead of accepting beliefs inherited from the past, Descartes resolved to doubt everything that could possibly be doubted, retaining only what was absolutely certain. Through this process, Descartes arrived at his most famous conclusion. Even if all external reality were an illusion, the act of doubting itself required a thinking subject. From this realization emerged the principle, I think, therefore I am. Thought, for Descartes, became the first indubitable truth and the foundation upon which all knowledge must be built. From this starting point, Descartes sought to reconstruct knowledge using reason alone. He argued that clear and distinct ideas, grasped by the mind with certainty, could serve as reliable truths. Mathematics, with its precision and logical structure, became his model for all genuine knowledge. Nature, he believed, could be understood through rational principles expressed in mathematical form. Descartes also introduced a dualistic view of reality. He divided existence into two fundamentally different substances, mind and body. The mind was immaterial, thinking, and indivisible, while the body was material, extended, and governed by mechanical laws. This distinction shaped later debates in philosophy, psychology, and science, raising enduring questions about consciousness and the relationship. Francis Bacon stands as one of the most influential thinkers of the early modern period and a central figure in the development of modern scientific thought. Living at the transition between medieval scholasticism and the scientific revolution, Bacon did not make major scientific discoveries himself. Instead, his lasting contribution was philosophical. He redefined how knowledge should be pursued, tested, and used. Before Bacon, much of European learning relied on ancient authorities, particularly Aristotle. Knowledge was treated as something inherited rather than discovered. Scholastic philosophy emphasized logical deduction from established texts, often detached from direct observation of nature. Bacon viewed this approach as stagnant and unproductive. He believed that true knowledge must begin not with authority, but with experience. Bacon argued that the human mind is naturally prone to error. He identified systematic sources of misunderstanding, which he famously called the idols of the mind. These included errors arising from human nature itself, from language, from cultural traditions, and from blind respect for authority. According to Bacon, unless these distortions were recognized and corrected, genuine knowledge would remain impossible. To overcome these limitations, Bacon proposed a new method of inquiry. Instead of beginning with general principles and deducing conclusions, he emphasized inductive reasoning. Knowledge, he argued, should arise from careful observation, experimentation, and the gradual accumulation of evidence. By comparing cases, identifying patterns, and testing hypotheses, humans could uncover the laws governing nature. This method marked a decisive shift in intellectual history. Bacon rejected speculation unsupported by evidence and criticized abstract reasoning detached from empirical facts. For him, science was not a contemplative pursuit, but an active investigation of the natural world. Nature was to be studied systematically, not interpreted symbolically or metaphysically. Bacon also redefined the purpose of knowledge. In medieval thought, knowledge was often valued for its own sake or for theological understanding. Bacon insisted that knowledge should be practical. His famous assertion that knowledge is power expressed the idea that understanding nature enables humans to improve their condition. Science, in his view, should relieve suffering, advance technology, and enhance human welfare. This practical orientation connected science to social progress. Bacon envisioned organized research institutions where scholars would collaborate, share findings, and pursue collective inquiry. His ideas anticipated the later development of scientific societies and research academies, which became central to modern science. Although Bacon did not fully develop the experimental methods later used by scientists, his philosophical framework profoundly influenced future thinkers. His emphasis on observation, experimentation, and utility helped shape the scientific mindset of the 17th century and beyond. Francis Bacon transformed the meaning of knowledge itself. By rejecting inherited authority, exposing the limits of human thinking, and promoting empirical inquiry, he laid the intellectual foundations for modern science. His legacy is not a specific discovery, but a new way of understanding how truth should be sought, tested, and applied. The scientific revolution marks a profound turning point in human thought. Emerging between the 16th and 17th centuries, it transformed how people understood nature, knowledge, and truth. Rather than relying on inherited authority, tradition, or religious doctrine, thinkers of this period turned toward observation, experimentation, and mathematical reasoning as the foundations of knowledge. Before the scientific revolution, European understanding of the natural world was largely shaped by Aristotle and medieval theology. Nature was explained through purpose, hierarchy, and divine intention. The universe was seen as a closed and orderly system centered on the earth. Knowledge was preserved and transmitted through ancient texts rather than tested through direct investigation. This framework began to collapse with new discoveries and methods. Nicholas Copernicus challenged the geocentric model by proposing that the Earth revolved around the Sun. Though initially controversial, this idea destabilized humanity's perceived place in the cosmos and suggested that long-accepted truths could be mistaken. The universe was no longer centered on human experience. Galileo Galilei expanded this challenge through systematic observation. Using the telescope, he gathered empirical evidence that supported heliocentrism. Galileo argued that nature should be studied through measurement and experiment rather than philosophical speculation. His conflict with religious authorities revealed a growing tension between scientific inquiry and institutional power. Johannes Kepler further transformed astronomy by describing planetary motion through precise mathematical laws. He showed that celestial bodies followed predictable patterns governed by universal principles rather than divine arbitrariness. Mathematics became the language through which nature could be understood. The scientific revolution also reshaped the study of motion, matter, and life. Francis Bacon emphasized inductive reasoning and the systematic collection of data. He argued that knowledge should serve practical purposes and improve human life. René Descartes introduced a new method based on doubt, clarity, and mathematical certainty, reinforcing the idea that reason could unlock nature's secrets. These developments culminated in the work of Isaac Newton. By unifying motion, gravity, and mathematics, Newton presented a vision of the universe governed by universal laws. Nature became a vast, intelligible system operating according to consistent principles. The cosmos was no longer mysterious in the medieval sense, but rational and predictable. The scientific revolution had consequences far beyond science. It altered humanity's relationship with authority, replacing tradition with evidence. It encouraged skepticism, critical thinking, and intellectual independence. Knowledge was no longer something inherited, but something discovered. By redefining truth as something tested rather than accepted, the scientific revolution laid the foundations for modern science, philosophy, and technology. It reshaped how humans understood the world and themselves, marking the transition from medieval thought to the modern age. The Reformation was one of the most transformative intellectual movements in Western history. Emerging in 16th-century Europe, it challenged the religious, political, and philosophical authority that had dominated society for centuries. At its core, the Reformation was not merely a religious revolt, but a rethinking of truth, power, conscience, and the relationship between the individual and authority. For much of medieval Europe, the Catholic Church functioned as the central source of spiritual and intellectual legitimacy. Salvation, morality, education, and political order were closely tied to ecclesiastical control. Over time, however, corruption, abuses of power, and the growing distance between doctrine and lived experience produced widespread dissatisfaction. Reformation thinkers arose within this tension, questioning not only church practices but the foundations of religious authority itself. Martin Luther stands at the beginning of the movement. His central claim was that salvation depends on faith alone rather than rituals, works, or institutional mediation. Luther rejected the idea that the Church possessed exclusive control over access to God. By insisting that Scripture alone was the highest authority, he undermined centuries of hierarchical tradition. His translation of the Bible into vernacular language allowed ordinary people to interpret religious texts independently, strengthening the role of individual conscience. In Switzerland, Ulrich Zwingli advanced a parallel reform. He emphasized strict adherence to Scripture and rejected practices lacking biblical justification. Religious images, elaborate rituals, and clerical excess were removed in favor of simplicity and moral discipline. Zwingli's ideas demonstrated that the Reformation was not a unified doctrine, but a diverse intellectual movement with internal disagreements. John Calvin further developed Reformation thought into a systematic theological framework. His emphasis on divine sovereignty and predestination reshaped ideas of human agency and responsibility. Calvin believed that all aspects of life should reflect religious discipline and moral order. His ideas influenced not only theology but social organization, encouraging discipline, education, and civic responsibility. Calvinism spread widely across Europe, shaping political structures and ethical values. Other reformers contributed to the movement in different ways. Some emphasized communal authority, others individual interpretation. Radical reformers questioned infant baptism, church hierarchy, and even the relationship between religion and the state. These internal divisions revealed how deeply the Reformation destabilized traditional frameworks of belief. Beyond theology, the Reformation had lasting philosophical consequences. It weakened centralized authority, encouraged literacy, and legitimized intellectual dissent. The idea that individuals could challenge inherited truth laid the groundwork for modern notions of freedom of thought, personal responsibility, and critical inquiry. The Reformation thinkers did not simply reform religion. They transformed how humans understood authority, truth, and the self. Their legacy shaped modern philosophy, politics, and culture, marking a decisive shift from medieval unity toward intellectual pluralism and individual conscience. Niccolò Machiavelli was born in 1469 in Florence, a city constantly torn apart by political rivalries, invasions, betrayals, and shifting alliances. This was not a world of ideals. It was a world of survival. Machiavelli did not begin as a philosopher in the classical sense. He was a diplomat, a civil servant, and a close observer of power in action. For years, he negotiated with kings, popes, generals, and mercenaries. He watched republics fall and tyrants rise. And from this brutal reality, he drew conclusions that shocked the moral thinking of his time. His most famous work, The Prince, was written after he was dismissed from office and exiled from political life. It is not a book about how rulers should behave. It is a book about how rulers do behave. Machiavelli begins with a radical claim. Politics has its own rules, separate from morality, religion, and ideal virtue. A ruler, he argues, must learn how not to be good. This does not mean celebrating cruelty for its own sake. It means understanding that mercy, honesty, and kindness can become weaknesses in a dangerous world. A prince who is always moral will be destroyed by those who are not. One of Machiavelli's most misunderstood ideas is the claim that it is better for a ruler to be feared than loved. Love, he says, depends on loyalty, and loyalty fades when circumstances change. Fear, rooted in consequences, is more reliable, so long as it does not turn into hatred. He also introduces the idea of virtue. Virtue does not mean moral virtue. It means strength, decisiveness, adaptability, and the ability to shape events rather than submit to them. A successful ruler must bend fortune to his will. Fortune, or fortuna, plays a major role in Machiavelli's thinking. He compares it to a violent river, unpredictable, destructive, but manageable if one prepares in advance. Those who rely only on luck will fall. Those who prepare and act boldly may survive. William of Ockham lived during the late 13th and early 14th centuries CE and is one of the most influential philosophers of the medieval period. Born in England, he was educated within the scholastic tradition, yet his ideas marked a decisive break from earlier medieval philosophy. Ockham challenged the complex metaphysical systems of thinkers like Thomas Aquinas, arguing for simplicity, clarity, and restraint in philosophical explanation. Ockham is best known for the principle later called Occam's razor. This principle states that entities should not be multiplied beyond necessity. In philosophical reasoning, this means that one should avoid positing unnecessary assumptions or abstract entities when simpler explanations suffice. Occam's razor was not merely a methodological tool but a broader attitude toward knowledge, encouraging economy and precision in thought. In metaphysics, Occam rejected the existence of universals as real entities existing independently of the mind. According to his nominalism, only individual things exist in reality. Universal concepts, such as humanity or redness, are mental signs used for classification and communication. This view undermined long-standing debates about abstract forms and shifted philosophical attention toward language and logic. Occam also redefined the relationship between reason and faith. He argued that many theological doctrines cannot be proven by reason alone and must be accepted through revelation. While reason is valuable for understanding the natural world, it has limits when addressing divine mysteries. This separation of philosophy and theology reduced speculative metaphysics and emphasized intellectual humility. In ethics, Occam emphasized the role of divine will. Moral laws, he argued, are grounded in God's commands rather than in a rational structure inherent in nature. Albert Einstein, born in 1879 in Germany, was a physicist whose revolutionary theories transformed the understanding of space, time, and the nature of the universe. Although primarily a scientist, Einstein's work had profound philosophical implications, challenging established notions of reality, causality, and the limits of human knowledge. His contributions reshaped both physics and the intellectual landscape of the 20th century. Einstein is best known for the theory of relativity, which introduced a new understanding of space and time. He demonstrated that space and time are not fixed, independent backgrounds, but interwoven into a single continuum, spacetime, whose structure is affected by matter and energy. This insight overturned the classical Newtonian view of an absolute, unchanging universe. The special theory of relativity, published in 1905, revealed that measurements of time and distance depend on the observer's state of motion. Concepts that once seemed universal, such as simultaneity, were shown to be relative. Later, the general theory of relativity, published in 1915, explained gravity not as a force acting at a distance, but as a curvature of spacetime caused by mass. The movement of planets, light, and matter could be understood as responses to this curvature. Einstein's work extended beyond physics into philosophical questions about determinism and reality. He challenged the emerging interpretation of quantum mechanics, famously asserting that God does not play dice, reflecting his belief in an underlying order and rationality in nature. He sought a coherent, unified understanding of the universe, in which physical laws were consistent, intelligible, and discoverable through reason. Time and space, Einstein showed, are not merely passive containers for events, but dynamic and relational. This insight forces a reconsideration of our intuitive understanding of reality. Past, present, and future are interrelated, and the universe cannot be fully understood through isolated observations. Knowledge of the cosmos, he argued, requires both empirical investigation and conceptual reflection. Einstein also engaged with broader human concerns. He emphasized the importance of curiosity, imagination, and intellectual integrity. Science, he argued, is not only a technical endeavor but a moral and cultural pursuit, revealing truths about the world and our place within it. He reflected on the relationship between science, philosophy, and society, insisting that knowledge carries responsibility. Beyond his scientific achievements, Einstein's life exemplified the ethical dimensions of intellectual work. He advocated for peace, civil rights, and international cooperation, recognizing that scientific progress must be accompanied by ethical awareness. His writings on politics, philosophy, and humanism reveal a thinker deeply concerned with the conditions of knowledge, freedom, and moral responsibility. Albert Einstein transformed modern thought by showing that the universe is more flexible, relational, and intelligible than previously imagined. By redefining space, time, and gravity, he challenged conventional wisdom and expanded the boundaries of human understanding. His work continues to shape science, philosophy, and our vision of reality itself. Sigmund Freud, born in 1856 in Austria, was a neurologist and thinker whose work profoundly transformed the understanding of the human mind. As the founder of psychoanalysis, Freud introduced a new framework for explaining human behavior, emphasizing unconscious processes, internal conflict, and the influence of early experience. His ideas reshaped psychology and deeply influenced philosophy, literature, and cultural theory. Freud's central claim was that much of human thought and behavior is governed by forces outside conscious awareness. He argued that the mind is not transparent to itself and that rational self-understanding is limited. Beneath conscious thought lies the unconscious, a domain of desires, memories, and impulses that shape behavior indirectly through dreams, slips of speech, and symptoms. To explain the structure of the mind, Freud developed a model consisting of the ID, ego, and superego. The ID represents instinctual drives, particularly those related to pleasure and aggression. The superego embodies internalized social norms and moral expectations. The ego mediates between these forces and external reality, attempting to maintain balance. Human psychological life, Freud argued, is defined by ongoing conflict among these elements. Freud placed strong emphasis on childhood development. He believed that early experiences, especially those involving family relationships, play a decisive role in shaping personality. Conflicts that are not resolved in childhood may be repressed, only to reappear later as anxiety, neurosis, or irrational behavior. This emphasis challenged the assumption that adulthood is governed solely by conscious choice and rational control. Dreams occupy a central place in Freud's theory. He described dreams as expressions of unconscious wishes, disguised through symbolic imagery. By interpreting dreams, Freud believed it was possible to gain insight into hidden desires and unresolved conflicts. This method became a key tool in psychoanalytic therapy. Freud's view of human nature was deeply unsettling to traditional moral and philosophical frameworks. He challenged the idea that humans are primarily rational and self-governing. Instead, he portrayed individuals as driven by competing impulses, shaped by repression, and constrained by psychological limits. Moral behavior, in Freud's account, often arises from internalized authority rather than free rational choice. Religion and culture were also central to Freud's analysis. He viewed religious belief as a response to psychological needs, particularly the desire for security and authority. Cultural institutions, while necessary for social order, impose restrictions on instinctual life, creating tension between individual desire and collective norms. Civilization, for Freud, is built on repression, and psychological conflict is its cost. Freud's theories were controversial and remain debated. While many of his specific claims have been challenged, his broader insight, that unconscious processes play a powerful role in shaping human life, has endured. His work opened new ways of thinking about identity, motivation, and responsibility. Sigmund Freud transformed modern thought by revealing the hidden dimensions of the mind. By exposing the influence of the unconscious, internal conflict, and early experience, he challenged humanity's confidence in reason and self-mastery. His ideas continue to shape how modern society understands the human self. Fyodor Dostoevsky, born in 1821 in Russia, was a novelist whose literary works deeply influenced philosophy, psychology, and modern thought. Although not a systematic philosopher, Dostoevsky explored philosophical questions through fiction with a depth and intensity unmatched in his time. His novels examine freedom, morality, suffering, faith, and the inner contradictions of human existence. Dostoevsky's thought developed in response to the intellectual climate of 19th-century Russia, particularly debates surrounding rationalism, socialism, and atheism. He was deeply concerned with the belief that human behavior could be fully explained or controlled through reason, science, or social systems. Against this view, Dostoevsky emphasized the unpredictability and irrationality of human nature. A central theme in Dostoevsky's work is freedom. He argued that human beings value freedom even when it leads to suffering or self-destruction. In Notes from Underground, he presents a narrator who rejects rational planning and social harmony simply to assert his independence. This rejection reveals a deeper claim: humans resist systems that deny their capacity for choice, even if those systems promise happiness. Dostoevsky explored the psychological consequences of moral responsibility. In Crime and Punishment, the character of Raskolnikov attempts to justify murder through a rational theory of exceptional individuals. The novel exposes the inner collapse that follows when moral limits are treated as obstacles rather than foundations of human life. Guilt, conscience, and suffering emerge as unavoidable dimensions of moral freedom. Faith and doubt occupy a central place in Dostoevsky's philosophy. He did not present belief as simple or unquestioned. Instead, faith appears as a struggle carried out in the face of suffering, injustice, and uncertainty. In The Brothers Karamazov, the conflict between belief and disbelief is dramatized through opposing characters, revealing faith as an existential commitment rather than a rational conclusion. Dostoevsky also examined the dangers of ideological thinking. He warned that systems promising perfect social order often justify cruelty in the name of abstract ideals. In Demons, revolutionary movements are portrayed as driven by resentment, pride, and the desire for control rather than genuine compassion. Dostoevsky feared that removing moral and spiritual limits would lead not to liberation, but to violence. Suffering, in Dostoevsky's work, is not portrayed as redemptive by necessity, but as revealing. It exposes the depth of human longing, responsibility, and vulnerability. Through suffering, characters confront the reality of their freedom and the consequences of their choices. Fyodor Dostoevsky reshaped modern thought by revealing the psychological and moral depths of human existence. Through literature, he explored questions that philosophy alone often avoided, showing that freedom, faith, and responsibility cannot be reduced to rational systems. His work remains central to understanding the inner conflicts of modern humanity. Friedrich Nietzsche, born in 1844 in Germany, was a philosopher whose work marked a decisive break from traditional moral, religious, and metaphysical systems. Writing in the late 19th century, Nietzsche sought to diagnose what he saw as a deep cultural crisis in Western civilization, one caused by the decline of religious belief and inherited moral frameworks. Nietzsche's philosophy begins with a critique of traditional values. He argued that concepts such as absolute truth, objective morality, and universal meaning were not timeless realities but human constructions shaped by history, psychology, and power. In his view, Western philosophy had often disguised moral assumptions as rational necessity. One of Nietzsche's most influential ideas is the declaration that God is dead. This phrase does not describe a literal event, but a cultural condition. Nietzsche meant that belief in a transcendent moral authority had lost its power in modern society. Science, historical criticism, and secular thought had eroded the foundations of religious certainty, leaving a vacuum of meaning. Nietzsche believed this loss created the risk of nihilism, the belief that life lacks inherent meaning or value. He viewed nihilism as a dangerous but unavoidable stage in cultural development. The challenge, he argued, was not to retreat to old beliefs but to confront this condition honestly and creatively. Central to Nietzsche's philosophy is the concept of the will to power. He understood life as fundamentally driven by the desire to grow, overcome resistance, and assert creative force. This drive was not merely political or physical, but psychological and cultural. Values, moral systems, and worldviews, Nietzsche claimed, express underlying struggles for power and self-affirmation. Nietzsche also developed a critique of traditional morality, particularly what he called slave morality. He argued that moral systems emphasizing humility, obedience, and self-denial emerged from weakness rather than strength. In contrast, master morality affirms creativity, excellence, and self-overcoming. Nietzsche did not advocate cruelty or domination, but the re-evaluation of values grounded in life affirmation. The figure of the Übermensch, or overhuman, represents Nietzsche's vision of a future individual who creates values rather than inheriting them. This figure embodies self-discipline, creativity, and responsibility in a world without guaranteed meaning. The Übermensch is not a biological ideal but an existential one. Nietzsche's style was unconventional, often aphoristic and poetic rather than systematic. He rejected traditional philosophical methods, believing that philosophy should challenge rather than reassure. His work influenced existentialism, psychology, literature, and modern critiques of culture and morality. Friedrich Nietzsche transformed philosophy by questioning its deepest assumptions. By confronting nihilism, morality, and meaning without reliance on transcendence, he forced modern thought to face the consequences of a world in which values must be created rather than discovered. His work remains central to understanding modernity and its unresolved tensions. Charles Darwin, born in 1809 in England, was a naturalist whose work transformed humanity's understanding of life, nature, and its own place in the world. Although not a philosopher in the traditional sense, Darwin's ideas had profound philosophical consequences, challenging long-held beliefs about creation, purpose, and human exceptionalism. Darwin's most influential contribution is the theory of evolution by natural selection. Through extensive observation, collection, and comparison of species, most famously during his voyage aboard the HMS Beagle, Darwin concluded that species are not fixed or unchanging. Instead, they evolve gradually over long periods of time. According to Darwin, individuals within a species exhibit variations. Some of these variations provide advantages in survival and reproduction within a given environment. Individuals possessing favorable traits are more likely to survive and pass those traits to the next generation. Over many generations, this process leads to the adaptation of species and the emergence of new forms of life. Natural selection operates without foresight or intention. It does not aim toward perfection or progress, but responds to environmental pressures. This insight challenged traditional views that saw nature as designed according to a fixed plan or divine purpose. Darwin's theory suggested that complexity and diversity could arise from simple, natural processes. Darwin extended his evolutionary framework to human beings. In The Descent of Man, he argued that humans share common ancestry with other animals. Mental capacities such as reasoning, emotion, and morality were not uniquely separate from nature but developed gradually through evolutionary processes. This claim had deep implications for philosophy, theology, and psychology. The reception of Darwin's ideas was mixed. While many scientists recognized the explanatory power of natural selection, others resisted its implications. Darwin's work raised questions about meaning, morality, and human identity in a world governed by natural processes rather than predetermined design. These questions would later influence existentialism, evolutionary psychology, and modern biology. Darwin himself was cautious in his conclusions. He emphasized evidence, gradualism, and the limits of human knowledge. He avoided making sweeping metaphysical claims, focusing instead on empirical observation and careful reasoning. Nevertheless, the philosophical impact of his work extended far beyond biology. Darwin's theory reshaped how humans understand time, life, and change. It introduced a vision of nature governed by deep time, constant adaptation, and ongoing transformation. Humanity was no longer positioned outside nature but fully embedded within it. Charles Darwin transformed modern thought by revealing that life evolves through natural processes rather than fixed design. His work challenged humanity to reconsider its origins, its continuity with the natural world, and the foundations of meaning itself. Few ideas have so fundamentally altered the way humans understand life and their place within it. Karl Marx, born in 1818 in Germany, was a philosopher, economist, and social theorist whose ideas fundamentally transformed modern thought. Writing during the rapid expansion of industrial capitalism, Marx sought to understand the underlying structures shaping society, labor, and human life. His work shifted philosophy away from abstract speculation toward the analysis of material conditions and social relations. Marx argued that human history is shaped primarily by economic forces rather than ideas alone. For him, the organization of production, how goods are made, who owns the means of production, and how labor is distributed, determines the structure of society. Political systems, laws, religions, and moral values, he believed, arise from these material foundations rather than existing independently of them. At the center of Marx's philosophy is the concept of historical materialism. According to this view, history progresses through conflicts between social classes with opposing economic interests. In ancient societies, this conflict took the form of master and slave, in feudal societies, lord and serf, and in modern capitalism, bourgeoisie and proletariat. These struggles, Marx argued, drive social change and historical transformation. Marx closely examined capitalism and its effects on human life. He believed that capitalism, while productive and dynamic, creates deep inequalities. Under this system, workers sell their labor in exchange for wages, but the value they produce exceeds what they are paid. The surplus value generated by labor is appropriated by those who own capital, leading to the accumulation of wealth in the hands of a few. One of Marx's most influential ideas is alienation. He argued that under capitalism, workers become alienated from the products of their labor, from the process of work, from other people, and ultimately from themselves. Labor becomes a means of survival rather than an expression of human creativity. As a result, individuals experience a loss of meaning and control over their own lives. Marx also analyzed ideology and religion as social phenomena. He believed that dominant ideas in any society tend to reflect the interests of the ruling class. Religion, in particular, was seen as a response to material suffering, a way of providing comfort in conditions of hardship. Rather than condemning belief, Marx sought to explain its social function within unequal systems. Unlike philosophers who emphasized interpretation alone, Marx insisted that philosophy must engage with reality. His famous claim that philosophers have only interpreted the world, while the task is to change it, reflects his commitment to practical transformation. Knowledge, for Marx, is inseparable from social action. Although many of Marx's political predictions remain debated, his analysis of capitalism, class, and power has had a lasting influence. His ideas shaped political movements, economic theory, sociology, and critical philosophy across the world. Karl Marx redefined philosophy by grounding it in material life and social struggle. By focusing on labor, class, and economic structures, he revealed how deeply human existence is shaped by the conditions under which people live. His work remains central to understanding modern society and its enduring inequalities. Søren Kierkegaard, born in 1813 in Denmark, is widely regarded as the founder of existential philosophy. Writing in opposition to the abstract systems of German idealism, especially Hegel, Kierkegaard shifted philosophy's focus from universal reason to the lived experience of the individual. His work examines subjectivity, choice, faith, and the inner tension of human existence. Kierkegaard believed that philosophy had lost sight of the individual. Systems that claimed to explain reality as a whole, he argued, ignored the concrete struggles, anxieties, and decisions that define human life. Truth, for Kierkegaard, is not merely objective or theoretical, but subjective. It is something that must be lived, chosen, and embodied by the individual. At the center of his thought is the idea of existence as a task. Human beings are not born with a fixed essence, they must become themselves through choices. This process involves uncertainty, responsibility, and risk. Kierkegaard emphasized that to exist authentically is to confront these conditions rather than escape them through conformity or abstraction. Kierkegaard described different stages of life to illustrate modes of existence. The aesthetic stage is characterized by pleasure, immediacy, and avoidance of commitment. The ethical stage involves responsibility, duty, and moral choice. Beyond these lies the religious stage, where the individual enters a personal relationship with God that transcends rational explanation. These stages are not automatic progressions but existential possibilities requiring choice. One of Kierkegaard's most influential concepts is anxiety. He viewed anxiety not as a psychological weakness, but as a fundamental condition of freedom. Anxiety arises from the awareness of possibility and the burden of choice. It reveals that humans are free, but that freedom comes with uncertainty and responsibility. Rather than eliminating anxiety, Kierkegaard believed it must be understood and confronted. Kierkegaard also explored despair as a condition of the self. Despair occurs when individuals fail to become themselves, either by losing themselves in social roles or by refusing their own limitations. True selfhood, he argued, requires acknowledging both freedom and dependence, finitude and possibility. Faith plays a central role in Kierkegaard's philosophy. He rejected attempts to rationalize religious belief through systems or proofs. Faith, for him, involves a leap beyond reason, not in opposition to it, but beyond its limits. This leap is deeply personal and cannot be justified by objective certainty. It represents commitment in the face of uncertainty. Kierkegaard's influence was largely unrecognized during his lifetime, but his ideas later shaped existentialism, theology, psychology, and literature. Thinkers such as Nietzsche, Heidegger, Sartre, and modern existentialists engaged deeply with his emphasis on individuality and lived experience. Søren Kierkegaard transformed philosophy by insisting that existence cannot be reduced to abstract theory. By focusing on choice, anxiety, faith, and selfhood, he revealed the depth and complexity of human life. His work reminds us that understanding reality begins not with systems, but with the individual confronting the demands of existence. Arthur Schopenhauer, born in 1788 in Germany, stands as one of the most distinctive and critical philosophers of the 19th century. Writing in the shadow of German idealism, he rejected its optimism and abstraction, offering instead a stark vision of reality centered on suffering, desire, and the limits of reason. His philosophy marks a turning point toward pessimism and a deeper psychological understanding of human existence. At the core of Schopenhauer's thought is the concept of the will. He argued that beneath all appearances lies a blind, irrational force that drives existence. This will is not conscious intention, but an endless striving present in nature, animals, and human beings alike. Everything that exists is an expression of this restless force, constantly desiring, struggling, and never fully satisfied. Schopenhauer adopted Kant's distinction between appearance and reality but reinterpreted it. The world we experience is a representation shaped by the mind's forms of perception, such as space, time, and causality. However, behind this world of appearances stands the will, the true inner reality that cannot be fully grasped by reason. While science explains how things behave, it cannot explain why existence itself is driven by endless striving. From this metaphysical framework arises Schopenhauer's pessimism. Desire, he argued, inevitably leads to suffering. When desires are unfulfilled, we experience pain; when they are fulfilled, satisfaction quickly fades into boredom, which in turn gives rise to new desires. Human life oscillates between suffering and emptiness, trapped in the cycle of willing. From this metaphysical framework arises Schopenhauer's pessimism. Desire, he argued, inevitably leads to suffering. When desires are unfulfilled, we experience pain; when they are fulfilled, satisfaction quickly fades into boredom, which in turn gives rise to new desires. Human life oscillates between suffering and emptiness, trapped in the cycle of willing. Schopenhauer's ethics respond to this condition not with optimism, but with compassion. Since all beings are expressions of the same will, suffering is universal. Moral insight arises from recognizing this shared condition. Compassion, rather than rational duty or social convention, becomes the foundation of ethical behavior. By reducing harm and understanding others' suffering, individuals can partially escape egoistic striving. Schopenhauer also identified two paths of liberation from the will. The first is aesthetic contemplation. Through art, especially music, individuals can temporarily transcend desire and experience the world without personal craving. Music, in particular, directly expresses the will itself, offering insight into the deepest structure of reality. The second path is asceticism. By denying the desires of the will through self-discipline, simplicity, and renunciation, individuals can weaken the grip of striving. This ideal reflects Schopenhauer's engagement with Eastern philosophies, especially Buddhism and Hinduism, which emphasize detachment and the cessation of desire. Although largely ignored during his lifetime, Schopenhauer's influence grew in later generations. His ideas shaped thinkers such as Nietzsche, Freud, and modern existentialists. By exposing the irrational forces beneath human behavior, he redirected philosophy toward psychology, suffering, and the inner life. Arthur Schopenhauer presents a vision of reality stripped of comforting illusions. By identifying desire as the root of suffering and compassion as the basis of morality, he offers a philosophy that confronts existence. Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, born in 1770 in Germany, is one of the most influential philosophers of modern times. He is often regarded as the pinnacle of German idealism, developing a systematic philosophy that seeks to explain reality, history, and human consciousness as a unified, rational process. Hegel's thought reshaped philosophy by emphasizing development, contradiction, and the interconnection of mind, society, and history. At the core of Hegel's philosophy is the concept of dialectics, a method of understanding how reality unfolds through contradictions and their resolution. Every idea, institution, or historical phenomenon contains within it opposing forces. These contradictions are not flaws, but necessary elements in a process that leads to higher levels of understanding and organization. Through this dynamic, the universe and human history advance toward rational development and freedom. Hegel also emphasized the role of consciousness in shaping reality. Human thought is not passive, it actively interprets and transforms the world. Self-consciousness emerges through interaction with others and through participation in ethical and social life. The individual realizes freedom not in isolation, but through engagement with family, civil society, and the state. The ethical life, or Sittlichkeit, represents the highest expression of human rationality and freedom. History, for Hegel, is the unfolding of reason itself. He viewed historical events, cultures, and societies as stages in the development of human consciousness and freedom. Nations, revolutions, and cultural achievements are expressions of the world spirit, or Geist, moving toward self-realization. Each epoch contains both progress and struggle, reflecting the dialectical tension between freedom and limitation, order and change. Hegel's metaphysics connects logic, mind, and the material world. He proposed that reality is a rational whole, and that contradictions within it drive development. Ideas, institutions, and material conditions are interconnected, forming a comprehensive system in which each part finds meaning in relation to the whole. This holistic approach distinguishes Hegel from earlier philosophers who treated mind and matter, or theory and history, as separate domains. Hegel's influence extends far beyond philosophy. His ideas shaped political thought, theology, literature, and social theory. Thinkers such as Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels, and many subsequent philosophers engaged with Hegelian dialectics to analyze society, history, and change. His emphasis on development, conflict, and resolution provided a framework for understanding progress in both thought and society. Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel demonstrates that philosophy can interpret reality as an unfolding, rational process. By connecting consciousness, history, and freedom, he presents a vision of the world in which human reason is both the agent and product of development. His work challenges us to see life, society, and knowledge not as static, but as dynamic processes shaped by contradiction, resolution, and the pursuit of rational self-realization. Immanuel Kant, born in 1724 in Prussia, is one of the most important figures in modern philosophy. His work sought to reconcile reason and experience, freedom and necessity, and the demands of morality with the structure of knowledge. Kant transformed philosophy by establishing a systematic framework for understanding human understanding, ethics, and the nature of reality. At the center of Kant's philosophy is the idea that knowledge arises from the interaction between the mind and the world. He argued that while experience provides the content of knowledge, the mind actively organizes and structures that content according to fundamental categories, such as space, time, and causality. In this way, humans do not passively perceive reality, but actively interpret it. This insight, known as transcendental idealism, bridged rationalism and empiricism, showing that reason shapes the way we experience the world. Kant's epistemology also addresses the limits of human knowledge. He claimed that we can know phenomena, the world as it appears to us, but not the noumena, the world as it exists independently of perception. This distinction preserves the possibility of objective reality while acknowledging the constraints of human cognition. Philosophy, according to Kant, must recognize both the power and the boundaries of reason. In ethics, Kant introduced a revolutionary moral framework based on reason and duty rather than consequences or inclination. He argued that moral principles are derived from a universal law that rational beings can recognize and follow. This principle, called the categorical imperative, commands that one act only according to maxims that could be willed as universal law. Morality is thus grounded in reason and universality, independent of personal desire or social custom. Kant emphasized human dignity and autonomy. Every individual is an end in themselves, never merely a means to another's goals. Respect for rational agency underlies obligations, justice, and the structure of ethical society. Moral action requires freedom and rational deliberation, yet it also aligns with objective principles that all rational beings must recognize. In addition to epistemology and ethics, Kant contributed to political philosophy, aesthetics, and metaphysics. He argued for the rule of law, republican government, and the importance of perpetual peace among nations. In aesthetics, he explored the nature of beauty, judgment, and the experience of the sublime, connecting human sensibility to universal principles. Kant's philosophy profoundly influenced subsequent thought. German idealists, Enlightenment thinkers, and modern philosophy all engaged with his ideas. His insistence on reason, autonomy, and universal moral law provided a framework for ethics, science, and politics that continues to shape intellectual discourse. Immanuel Kant demonstrates that philosophy can be both rigorous and practical, exploring the conditions of knowledge, morality, and freedom. By examining the structure of human reason and the principles of moral obligation, he established a vision of thought in which understanding and action are guided by reason, autonomy, and universal principles. His work remains a foundation for modern philosophy and the ongoing pursuit of knowledge and justice. Martin Heidegger, born in 1889 in Germany, was a philosopher whose work transformed the study of existence, time, and the meaning of being. Writing in the early 20th century, Heidegger sought to return philosophy to its fundamental question: what does it mean to be? Rejecting abstract systems and purely theoretical knowledge, he focused on the lived experience of human beings and their relation to the world. At the heart of Heidegger's thought is the concept of Dasein, a term he uses to describe human existence. Dasein literally means, being there, emphasizing that humans are always situated in a world, engaged with it, and aware of their own existence. For Heidegger, understanding the nature of being requires examining the conditions of this situated existence rather than seeking universal, abstract definitions. Heidegger emphasized that humans are fundamentally temporal. Our understanding of ourselves and the world is shaped by our awareness of time, especially the inevitability of death. This awareness introduces a unique form of anxiety, revealing the finite nature of life and the responsibility inherent in our choices. By confronting mortality, individuals can live more authentically, making decisions that reflect their true selves rather than conforming to social expectations. Another central idea in Heidegger's philosophy is being in the world. Humans do not exist in isolation, they are always embedded in relationships, culture, and practical activities. Knowledge is not merely theoretical but arises through engagement with tools, tasks, and other people. The ordinary routines of life, which might seem insignificant, actually reveal the structure of human existence and its possibilities. Heidegger also critiqued modern technology and the tendency of contemporary society to reduce the world to a set of resources to be controlled and exploited. He argued that this attitude obscures the deeper questions of being, turning human life into a mechanical process. Philosophy, for Heidegger, should reveal the hidden structures of existence and restore a sense of wonder and reflection. Language, in Heidegger's thought, plays a central role in shaping understanding. It is through language that humans disclose the world, interpret experience, and communicate the meaning of being. Words are not mere labels, they carry the weight of existence itself and provide a medium through which humans encounter reality. Heidegger's work influenced existentialism, phenomenology, theology, and literary theory. Philosophers such as Sartre, Merleau-Ponty, and Gadamer built upon his insights to explore freedom, perception, and interpretation. His ideas continue to shape debates about human nature, technology, and the foundations of thought. Martin Heidegger transformed philosophy by returning attention to the question of being, emphasizing temporality, authenticity, and human engagement with the world. By examining existence in its ordinary and extraordinary dimensions, he revealed the structures that shape life, choice, and understanding. His work challenges us to consider what it means not simply to exist, but to exist consciously and authentically in a world that is always unfolding. Karl Popper, born in 1902 in Austria, was a philosopher whose work transformed the philosophy of science and the understanding of knowledge itself. Writing during the 20th century, Popper sought to address a central question: how can we distinguish genuine science from mere speculation? He challenged traditional notions of verification and argued for a more rigorous, critical approach to understanding the world. Popper's most influential idea is falsifiability. He argued that a theory or claim is scientific only if it can, in principle, be proven wrong. No amount of observation can conclusively verify a universal claim, but a single counterexample can falsify it. This insight shifts the focus of science from seeking certainty to testing ideas critically and openly. For Popper, the growth of knowledge is not linear or accumulative in a simple sense. Science advances through conjectures and refutations. Scientists propose bold hypotheses, and these are subjected to rigorous testing. Theories that withstand attempts at falsification survive, while those that fail are discarded or revised. This process, he argued, ensures that knowledge is self-correcting and progressively closer to truth, even if absolute certainty remains unattainable. Popper also addressed the social and political implications of knowledge. He was critical of totalitarianism and ideologies that claimed to possess ultimate truth. Dogmatic systems, whether political or scientific, suppress criticism and inquiry. Popper argued that an open society must encourage debate, criticism, and the questioning of authority. Freedom of thought, he insisted, is essential not only for ethics but for the advancement of knowledge itself. A further contribution of Popper's philosophy is his critique of historicism, the idea that history unfolds according to predetermined laws or inevitable patterns. He rejected predictions of historical inevitability, arguing that social and political developments are shaped by human choices and unforeseen events. Attempts to impose rigid systems of historical interpretation, Popper warned, often lead to authoritarianism and oppression. Popper's work bridges philosophy, science, and social theory. He emphasized that knowledge is provisional, tentative, and always open to revision. This approach contrasts with philosophies that seek absolute foundations or unquestionable certainties. For Popper, intellectual humility and critical engagement are the hallmarks of true scientific and philosophical inquiry. His influence has been far-reaching. Philosophers of science, social theorists, and political thinkers have drawn on his ideas to evaluate scientific methods, democratic institutions, and the ethical responsibility of knowledge. Concepts such as falsifiability and critical rationalism remain central to contemporary debates in philosophy, science, and education. Karl Popper transformed the way humans approach knowledge. By emphasizing falsifiability, conjecture and refutation, and the necessity of critical thought, he challenged complacency and dogmatism. His work reminds us that understanding is never complete, that truth is provisional, and that progress depends on the courage to question, test, and think freely. Jean-Paul Sartre, born in 1905 in France, was a philosopher, writer, and dramatist whose work became a cornerstone of existential thought. Writing in the turbulent 20th century, Sartre examined human freedom, responsibility, and the conditions of existence in a world without inherent meaning. His philosophy insists that individuals must confront life as it is, rather than relying on external authorities or preordained purpose. At the heart of Sartre's thought is the claim that existence precedes essence. Unlike objects, which are defined by their purpose before they exist, humans exist first and must define themselves through action. There is no inherent human nature, no predetermined role, no divine blueprint. Individuals are free, and with that freedom comes the weight of responsibility for their choices and their lives. Sartre explored the consequences of radical freedom through the lens of human experience. To be free is not always liberating, it can be deeply unsettling. Awareness of freedom produces anguish, a recognition that one is solely responsible for creating values and meaning in an indifferent universe. Unlike fear, which responds to external threats, this existential anguish arises from the realization of personal accountability and the limitless possibilities of choice. Closely connected to freedom is the concept of bad faith. Sartre describes bad faith as the self-deception people use to escape responsibility. It is an attempt to pretend that their freedom is limited, that roles, social norms, or external pressures define who they are. By denying the radical openness of existence, individuals avoid the anxiety of responsibility, but in doing so, they live inauthentically. Authentic life requires acknowledging freedom and making deliberate choices, even in the face of uncertainty. Sartre also examined the relational dimension of human existence. The presence of others shapes identity, but often as a source of tension. In the famous dictum, "Hell is other people," from his play No Exit, Sartre highlights the conflict between selfhood and the gaze of others. Recognition and judgment from others can constrain freedom, yet relationships are unavoidable. Humans exist among each other, negotiating selfhood continually. Ethics, for Sartre, is inseparable from freedom. There is no objective moral law, rather, each individual must create values through choices. To act ethically is to take full responsibility for one's decisions, acknowledging their implications not only for oneself but for humanity, since in creating values, one implicitly affirms them as possible for all. Sartre's existential philosophy influenced literature, psychology, and political thought. His works, including Being and Nothingness and numerous novels and plays, explore the tension between freedom, responsibility, and social constraints. He addressed the lived reality of oppression, commitment, and human creativity in a complex and often absurd world. Jean-Paul Sartre transformed modern thought by insisting that humans are radically free and wholly responsible for their existence. By emphasizing choice, authenticity, and the creation of values, he challenged inherited systems of meaning and called individuals to confront life directly. His work remains a profound exploration of what it means to be human in a world without predetermined purpose. Albert Camus, born in 1913 in Algeria, was a philosopher, novelist, and essayist whose work explored the human condition, meaning, and freedom in a world without inherent purpose. Often associated with existentialism, though distinct from it, Camus developed a philosophy centered on the confrontation with absurdity, the tension between humanity's search for meaning and the universe's silence. For Camus, life presents a fundamental problem: humans naturally seek order, purpose, and clarity, yet the world offers none. This confrontation produces the experience of the absurd, a recognition of the gap between desire and reality. The absurd is not a moral failing or intellectual mistake, it is a condition of human existence itself. Camus argued that awareness of the absurd does not necessitate despair. Instead, it invites reflection on how one should live in a universe without preordained meaning. He rejected both nihilism, the denial of value, and religious or metaphysical solutions that attempt to impose artificial meaning. Confronting the absurd requires honesty, lucidity, and acceptance of reality as it is. One of Camus' most influential concepts is revolt. Rebellion against the absurd does not seek to eliminate it but to live fully in spite of it. Through conscious engagement with life, creation, and action, humans can affirm their existence. Camus illustrates this principle in the myth of Sisyphus, portraying Sisyphus, condemned to roll a boulder endlessly up a hill, as a figure who embodies defiance and acceptance. In embracing his fate without hope for ultimate purpose, Sisyphus achieves freedom and dignity. Camus also explored freedom and responsibility as responses to absurdity. Human beings are free to make choices precisely because life has no predetermined script. With freedom comes responsibility, the need to act ethically and authentically in the absence of external authority. Morality, in Camus' thought, emerges from human solidarity, empathy, and recognition of shared existence, rather than divine command or universal law. Literature played a central role in Camus' philosophy. His novels, including The Stranger and the Plague, dramatized the confrontation with absurdity, exploring the psychological and moral dimensions of human life. Characters face alienation, injustice, and mortality, yet navigate these challenges with awareness, courage, and ethical reflection. Camus' thought influenced existentialism, literature, political theory, and modern humanism. He examined oppression, justice, and ethical responsibility in both individual and societal contexts. His insistence on confronting reality without illusions shaped 20th-century debates about freedom, meaning, and the human condition. Albert Camus transformed modern thought by emphasizing the necessity of facing life's absurdity directly. By advocating revolt, lucidity, and ethical engagement, he revealed how human beings can create meaning and live authentically in a universe without inherent purpose. His work continues to challenge readers to confront life honestly, responsibly, and courageously.